This morning and all day today, we're going to be doing a seminar on Jungian explorations of spiritual paths, presented by a distinguished Jungian analyst, J. Marvin Spiegelman. Welcome. It just happens that today is Father's Day. And we know, particularly in the field of psychology, fathers come in all kinds of ways to us, biologically, genetically, spiritually, educationally, as mentors, analysts, in all kinds of ways, the father comes to us and brings us into life. Dr. Spiegelman has been such a father to many of us here in the Jungian community and continues to provide leadership, inspiration, and direction to the C.G. Jung Institute here and to our membership. It is an enormous pleasure for us to be doing this, to be acknowledging his work and to be expanding it out into the public. Today we're going to be listening to him explore a variety of spiritual paths, including Christianity, Buddhism, Kabbalism, Kundalini Yoga, and others, to find the common threads that form the archetypal basis for spiritual growth and development. So today we are really fortunate to have the time and opportunity to hear these explorations through a man who has done an incredible job in writing and talking and teaching on these spiritual issues. So I'll turn it over now to my mentor, my first analyst, my teacher, my spiritual inspiration.
Wow. I'm leaving now.
Dr. Marvin Spiegelman.
Thank you, Barry. I also did a lot of reading. Thank you all for coming out on this Father's Day, an auspicious day, as Dr. Kavili mentioned. I see you're mostly mothers here, so the fathers are presumably at home. I want to dedicate this day to my own father, who lived from 1901 to 1995, who was very beloved by his family, including me. He came to this country when he was 18 from Europe with his brother, and he worked 6.5 days a week until he was 85, raising my sister and me. And he had a great sense of humor and was tremendously patriotic. He so much appreciated this country, as you can imagine. He had deserted the Polish army, which was a good thing to do when they were fighting Russia. And he was very different from my grandfather. None of you, I think very few of you were here Friday night when I spoke about the influence of my grandfather, who was a Hasid, who was a very, very strong spiritual influence. And my father, with his humor and his love, was a human influence, and very important. So it is auspicious that we meet on the Friday, and I want to dedicate this to my father. We'll talk today, as Barry mentioned, about various spiritual paths. I don't know that I'll get to all of them, but if you read the book, there are a bunch of others that might be useful to you. I want to start with how I got into this. In the second year of my analysis, after spending a lot of time, as we all do, on working with childhood issues, around Christmas time, I had a dream that a divine child was being born, and was being attended not by the three wise men, but by a Jewish rabbi, a Christian priest, and a Buddhist priest. The child was of uncertain gender, but that child, obviously is a symbol of the self, would now be 61 years old, and he has written 20 books and lots of articles. So you can see from that dream that my own myth, my path, has been ecumenical via a number, approaching the divine, the source, from a variety of perspectives. I'm going to start this by doing what Jung asked Miss Barbara Hanna to do at every lecture, namely to tell the story of the Rainmaker. Who has not heard the story of the Rainmaker? Okay, there are 3 of you. But I'm going to tell it anyway, so to refresh the rest of you, because it's a significant tale, and maybe toward the end of the afternoon we can discuss to what extent that's still true. The story goes as follows. Richard Wilhelm, the translator a sinologist, the translator of the I Ching. You've all heard of the I Ching, I suppose. Was in China, and he heard that there was a rainmaker coming to a village near where he was. So of course he was interested. He went to this village and was there when the rainmaker came, and then came this weazened old man who came into the village and was sniffing around and obviously unhappy with what he was sniffing. And he asked the village people to just provide him with a hut at the edge of town and provide his food outside and not bother him. Well, he went into his hut, and the first day nothing happened. The second day, the clouds formed in this drought area. And the third day, it not only rained, but it hailed. Well, naturally, Wilhelm was very impressed, and he went up to the old rainmaker and said, well, you can make rain. The rainmaker said, no, I can't make rain. But Wilhelm said, well, what happened? He said, well, when I came to this village, everything was out of harmony. I come from a place which is in harmony. So I faced this harmony. It was very distasteful. So I asked to have a place apart where I can put myself back into harmony, because, of course, their disharmony fragmented me too. So I meditated, and the first day nothing happened. Second day I felt some change. The third day I finally was back in harmony with myself, and then naturally it rained. The idea being, and this is the idea that I'm sure all you extroverts don't agree with, that I can't do much about the world, but I can change myself. And if I change myself, the world will change. I see some nods, and some other people doubt that. And they're both legitimate. Anyhow, so I did what Jung asked Hannah to do. As you can see, there's a PowerPoint we'll be using later on, but I'm going to start with, that story has to do with the divine within. I'm now going to discuss an example of the divine among. And divine among is what you normally experience when you go to church and you hear the Mass and so on, all of those group ritual activities. And the one that I selected, because it's probably less known to all of you, are there any Muslims present? And then I'm sure you don't know any of this, is the Islamic Hajj. I think it got spelled as jihad, didn't it, in the brochure? Did they say, how does you talk about the jihad? God help me, no. Although jihad doesn't only mean killing people at all. It means a spiritual jihad where you transform to. But I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the Hajj, which is the voyage, the trip that Muhammad made from Medina to Mecca. And Mecca, of course, as you know, is the holiest city in Islam. And we've all seen these pictures from above, because no non-Muslim can enter it, really, where you see this Kaaba, this big stone temple, and the people, hordes of people moving around, right? Very impressive. And the Hajj is the pilgrimage that every Muslim is expected to make at least once in your life. And I'm going to talk about that. And the interpretation I'm getting for a man named Henri Corbin, a great French scholar who really brought Islam, and especially the mystical aspects of Islam, to the foreground since the 1950s or so. And it's from his understanding that I present what it's about. So before we get to the pilgrimage itself, we need a little bit of theological background. It begins with, of course, with paradise, with the fall of our ancestors, Adam and Eve, when the fall out of paradise. And of course, you know what it means for Judaism. The fall is a consequence of disobedience. And for Christians, it's called the felix culpa. Are any Christians present? Well, one or two. Mostly are probably a bunch of Jungian agnostics. But in the felix culpa is the happy guilt, because it meant that fall resulted, the consequence was the sacrifice of Jesus, who carried the sins of mankind. So it's a happy guilt, that redemption was possible thereby. So that's the Jewish and Christian versions of that fall. The Islamic version is a little different. The reason for the fall, according to Islam, is because Adam and Eve and us, when we make that mistake, we took the eating of the fruit literally instead of symbolically. It's an interesting thing. That the sin consists in naturalizing the things of the spirit, making them concrete. For example, if you're a drunk, what are you doing? You are literalizing the spirit by taking in spirit, but taking in as a fluid. Or you're addicted to sugar, to candy. You want the sweetness of life, and you take it in concretely instead of spiritually, psychologically. And that's how Islam sees it. That's pretty advanced. I think you'll agree. So this was the sin, and the repair. What the result of sin, of course, which means missing the mark, is to separate us from the divine, from God. And these rituals are our ways of reconnecting. And the pilgrimage to Mecca is that way of reconnecting with the divine. It's an initiation of repairing that breach. Okay. Now, the Hajj itself begins with the angel Gabriel, who was sent to Adam in his despair about exile from paradise, and led Adam to where the temple, the Kaaba, was going to be built. Now, our world is constituted by the four elements: earth, air, fire, and water. And the temple itself constitutes the meeting our earthly spiritual needs compared to the spiritual temple in heaven. So that's the image. Always, this is the, so to speak, archetypal image in heaven that gets manifested on earth in the Kaaba. And Gabriel, or Gabriel, whom you probably all know, is the angel which is connected with healing, right? You all knew that too. Some of the Christians knew. Maybe a few of the Jews, but I don't see any Jews present. The task was for Adam with Gabriel to use his toe and outline where that Kaaba was going to be. And this is how you manifest it that way. Now the penitents, these pilgrims, all of them coming together, they have to connect with Gabriel first, and that takes a while. You walk about the temple. You make one circumambulation about the temple before you start on this place nearby, these places nearby where you do various things, and through that you get in contact with Gabriel, so that you are in companionship of Gabriel on this pilgrimage. Okay, now the first thing you do after this happens, and this may take however long it takes, a day or two or whatever, Adam is taken by, and the pilgrim is taken by Gabriel to a valley near Mecca, which is called Mina, M-I-N-A. And that word means desire. Interesting, huh? That in following the road that leads to God, the first thing that you need to have is the desire to meet with God, and it initiates in the heart. And that desire must be great enough, ardent desire, so that you are ready to do so. So in Islam, God's greatest temple, the Beit Allahi al-Akbar, I say pretty good, don't I? Is ardent desire, and it's in the heart. And as you know, Islam is a very feeling, passionate religion. And if you think about, how Christians and Jews and how Muslims, how they all pray. And Christians, as you know, you kneel before God. Jews mostly rock back and forth because they're in endless dialogue with God, including argument. But Islam, no, you're flat on your face. You're into utter, total submission. And of course, that's a passion. Okay, so once this is achieved, you're in Mina, and you have that experience, you're in total connection with your personal desire to reconnect with God. You're now beginning to build your own spiritual Kaaba, your own temple. For Mina, the angel and Adam go to a nearby place which is called Al-Arafat. You're familiar with that name. Okay, what that name refers to means to have escaped from the place or level that one was at. And you're signifying being on the way, going from exile to the path. And presumably that gentleman Arafat was talking about from being from exile to being on his own path. And I'm not sure what that path was. Now the thing is, you arrive at Al-Arafat at sunset. And you probably may stay there a few days as well. And the task at this point, the angel says, Gabriel says to all the pilgrims, now that the sun is on the point of setting, acknowledge your fault, acknowledge your guilt. And this means that the spiritual sun, which is the truth, is veiled because of your betrayal. And now, this is a very interesting thing. Acknowledge that you are estranged from God as your friend. God is your friend, not your father, not Father's Day or Mother's Day. God is your friend. You're estranged from God as friend because you considered that you yourself were sufficient to yourself in order to be yourself. That's fantastic. I don't know of any other place that this is the error, this is the sin. You thought you could become who you are all by yourself without God. You silly thing. And that's the sin you have to acknowledge at this point. Okay. That may take more than a day to get to that place. Okay. Now, once this is achieved, the pilgrim then goes to a place called Muzdalifah. Muzdalifah. By the way, if you want to know further about this, where I got this from was Henry Corbin's book, Temple and Contemplation. And it's on page 245 to 253. There are a lot of other good things in that book, too. Muzdalifah means approach. You see, now you're able to really begin to approach God. You've begun to heal that breach through this recognition of why your estrangement is there. And you perform here what is called a dhikr. You probably heard this word from Islam, D-H-I-K-R, which has to do with the recollection of God. There are many things that are used this way. This is an illusion signifying that this mystical station coming after separation is there at this point you truly reunite with God. Now you're able to do that. And you say prayers both at sunset, which is called Maghrib, M-A-G-H-R-I-B, and the coming of night. Now you're familiar with that, I think, from Vespers and Compline in Christianity. It's a parallel. And this is called the vigil in the night, which is the waiting for the dawn. The waiting for the dawn. This is also, there's a parallel in Judaism on the holiest day of the year, on Yom Kippur. The first prayer is from, there's a psalm, and this has to do with my heart. It longs for God. My heart is like waiting for the dawn, waiting for the dawn. It's like a watchman. And as a merchant seaman who did a lot of waiting for the dawn when I was in the Merchant Marine with the night shift from 12 to 4, I know very well what it means to wait for that dawn. And you all know that too when you're in your despair, waiting for that sort of experience of the divine face. And it is a face. It's called, what you're waiting for is the morning of the presence, or the face of divine reality. This is very important. You probably know this, seeing that, for example, Moses was not permitted to see the face because he would be destroyed. But he saw God's shadow, so to speak, as God went by. And here it's as if there is a possibility of seeing the morning of the presence, which is the equivalent of the face, but not the actual face. And at dawn, when you have this experience, you're up all night and going through this vigil, the angel instructs Adam to make a sevenfold confession of his sin, of his fault, erasing darkness. A sevenfold confession. And to ask God in sevenfold adoration to return to him. And these seven acts are the removal of the seven veils between man and the divine face. Maybe you have a different understanding now of the veil. For us moderns, this is a denial of the humanity of, particularly of women, for example, who are forced to veil themselves. But for Islam, the veil is what separates you from God. And you have, I'll talk about it later, there are 7 steps for you to come to face God. And also the veiling of the woman is because she's so beautiful that the man can't stand it. Of course, they don't say the man can move away or learn to control himself better. That's another possibility. But the veil itself carries that thing, not of subjection, but because it's of too great a power. Maybe you knew that already. Okay, now, this working through the 7 layers of the 7 veils makes it possible to the realization of the pearl, P-E-A-R-L, which is the angel, which is the equivalent of Gabriel within man. And the pearl is the form assumed by God to reveal himself to man. So it is God's presence in the soul. The pearl is both gnosis, namely wisdom, and the soul itself. Now once that happens, Adam or Eve is now worthy to enter into the temple. Okay. Now I have to tell you a little bit more about what the background is. Here it's the pearl has behind it they call the secret of the black stone. The black stone was once the angel Gabriel, who at the beginning tried to remind Adam of his initial covenant with God. After the betrayal, God sent this angel, Gabriel, in the form of a white pearl toward Adam from paradise. Adam saw it, did not recognize it as a pearl. He was blinded by it, saw it only as a stone. But the pearl speaks now, reminding Adam of the covenant, and that Satan has blotted out the memory of God as a companion, as friend. That's the function of Satan. Blocks out the memory that God is your friend. So instead of seeing the pearl, there is the stone. Interesting. How probably some of you know about the stone in alchemy. And that's Satan's function, is to block it out. Now, when Adam finally, at this point, sees this, he weeps and kisses the pearl, which is the angel, and renews his agreement and promise to God. Okay, God then, at this point in the Hajj, gives the pearl an appearance of a stone again, which Adam carries on his shoulder. And as he comes back, walking back to the main temple, he tires. And then it's an exchange. He carries the stone sometimes, and the angel carries the stone. This is symbolic. I mean, you carry it most. There's another place of the stone. And when you come back, you place your own stone in the wall of the temple, that your stone, self, spirit, soul is again connected with humankind and back in this holy place. It's headed in the corner when he comes back to Mecca. But it's not so easy. On the way back, remember we were back at Muzdalifah. On the way back toward the temple, the angel goes with Adam and Eve. They pass Mina again. Remember, there was the place of desire. Because Adam and Eve have now attained the goal of their desire, which is to be reunited with God. But in Mina Valley, there is another ritual, which is to make a gesture of defiance at a figure representing Iblis, Satan, Shaitan. This is the last bit you have to do. And there's a ritual called Jimrah, J-I-M-R-A-H, which means throwing stones. You throw stones at this figure who represents Satan. Now, this is the fantastic thing about Islam. This is the last moment in which Iblis, Satan, tries to triumph again by making the pilgrim stop at the awareness of being carried away, annihilated to himself. This is very Islam. Annihilated is fana, F-A-N-A. Now, if you're so aware of your being annihilated that you're exalted to the status of the absolute, the ultimate inflation. Oh, look what I've done. Right? And then you're done. You see, you're again inflated, you're lost. And this is what Satan tries to do. And the pilgrim, and this is what's so fantastic, must annihilate his annihilation I don't know if you're affected by that the way I am. I think that's tremendous. You have to annihilate the annihilation and refuse to so consolidate yourself, so make yourself strong that you're no longer keeping company with God as your divine companion and in your bi-unity. In other words, you have to keep your weakness. You can't be too damn strong. You have to acknowledge your vulnerability. You see, with your enlightenment and with your union and with this tremendous experience, you must keep this other part, which is weak and vulnerable. And therefore, you are united with God. I don't know any other religion. I know quite a few that has it quite like that. Okay, so then when the pilgrims accomplish this, they now come back to the temple, and they're ordered to journey from God, in the company of God, toward created beings. You're going from God, with God, toward humanity, which is the Kaaba. And this completes the journey of the repair of ego separation from God. And you have to do that 7 times, moving around. Constructing the temple in the heart, which is invisibly built by angels. Now, the secret of the white pearl, which was, the black stone before, is that you restore that through, if you do that, this is only mystical people that do that. When I talk about the spiritual paths, this is a collective path, the among, and that's enough. That's like going to Mass and, to synagogue and so on. But where all these religions come together, the monotheism is in this mystical path. And the number 7 is very important always. 7 steps. And then there are these ways of unveiling, and there are 7 different stages internally of working with yourself to come to that realization as well. And this is called building the temple of light, the Malakut, M-A-L-A-K-U-T, which they get from Kabbalah, which is called Malkuth, and that's that's in a sense heaven. This is earth, and this is how you build that temple in your own soul. Okay, that's a fistful. But I want to complete that Islamic connection with some of the mystical path. And one of my favorite guys is somebody named Ibn al-Arabi. Any of you know of him? From the 12th, 13th century. That was a fantastic time. These periods in history all over the world where there, for example, in the 5th century BCE, you have Socrates and Plato, and you have Isaiah, and you have Buddha, and you have Lao Tzu. Imagine that bunch in this one, And the 12th, 13th century is not quite as big as that, but pretty big. Because you have Ibn al-Arabi, you have St. Francis, you have Maimonides, you have Kabbalah in southern France and in Spain, and that's quite a lot too. You have Maimonides as well, I mentioned there. So these are these periods. I'm hoping one's coming up now, at least shortly after I go. And you guys will have the benefit. Anyway, here's Ibn al-Arabi. I wrote a chapter on the relationship between active imagination as seen by Jung and Ibn al-Arabi. It's in this book I edited called Sufism, Islam, and Jungian Psychology. There are a number of papers in that book. I think it's not on a print. I don't think you have it here, though. Not sure. It's not here, probably. Anyway, this is a poem by Ibn al-Arabi. My heart has become capable of every form. It is a pasture for gazelles, and a convent for Christians, and a temple for idols, and the pilgrim's Kaaba, and the tables of the Torah, and the book of the Koran. I follow the religion of love. Excuse me. Whatever way love's camels take, that is my religion and my faith. Love's camels. Isn't that wonderful? It's really splendid. Okay. I would we'll hold off for questions maybe until I finish this next part. So we have the within and the among. Now I'm going to give an example of the around. The around is where the divine occurs in nature, in music, in literature, and synchronicity art. Okay. And this I take from here as a Hindu music story. And I'll read it because it should be read properly. Once when the Mughal Emperor Akbar was ruling India, his courtiers presented a concert to him by Tanzan, the most senior and sweet singer of them all. He held his audience in rapt attention. With his profound knowledge of structure and tempo, and his voice had a magic that made his listeners weep or smile. His lyrics also resonated with passion and subtlety of meaning. His artistry, in short, transported all present to the highest realms of sensuous pleasure so that no one wanted the music to end. Emperor Akbar was so moved that he arose from his throne and bowed deeply before Tanzan. He bestowed upon the great musician a bag of 10,000 gold coins, the largest gift ever given to a musician. But the observant emperor noticed that although everyone was celebrating, Tanzan's face was gloomy as a cloudy sky. When queried as to why the sadness, the musician was evasive. But then he said, "Your Majesty, please disguise yourself and come with me tonight. It is a full moon night, and I will take you to a place which will show you why I am so unhappy." The pair then walked under the bright and shining full moon to Brindaban, the sacred park associated with Krishna. As they approached the park, they heard a man singing to the accompaniment of the tampura, a drone instrument. They hid behind a bush and saw a miracle. There sat a man who was obviously a devotee of Lord Krishna. He was pouring out his heart, his love, his entire being through the medium of his singing. Every wave of his voice was so full of ecstasy that Tanzan and the emperor could not speak a word. Nor were they the only audience. Silent devotees were joined by monkeys and cows, while parrots and parakeets, mynas and cuckoos sat motionlessly listening in the trees. Even the trees and the vines, rocks and mountains, and the moon seemed to take part in the divine ecstasy of the singer's voice. Akbar and Tanzan were both transported as well. When the music ended, Tanzan led the emperor back to the palace. After a time of silence under a tree, Tanzan spoke. "Your Majesty, the singer that you heard in Brindaban is my master, Swami Haridas. He is singing for Krishna. He is singing about Krishna. And when he is singing, he is Krishna himself. Such is his devotion. His music is that of ecstasy. My music is the music of pleasure, because I am singing for courtiers. I have not conquered my ego, and neither have my listeners, have they? My music is not bad, and I do not mean to say that the music sung for entertainment is bad, but my guru's music is infinitely superior to my own." He was absolutely unaware of his audience or his surroundings. For him, everyone and everything had become Krishna. Earlier tonight, when you rewarded me, I was wondering whether I will ever sing as Swami Haridas does, even once. That was why I looked so sad. Tears streaming down his face, the emperor got up, and without saying a word, he embraced his favorite musician. I think we can have the first slide. This is the Divine Between. You see, this is a woodcut from the 17th century. You can all see it pretty clearly, can't you? It's the late stage of alchemy when many of the alchemists were perfectly aware that what they were working on is transforming themselves, not turning gross matter into gold, but they were being transformed. And this is from that period. And this is the Divine Between. Now, you know the Divine Between, we all know that through what? Through love. The divine is present in the love, right? Or Buber writes about the I and thou relationship. Any relationship which has that deep flow has the divine present. That's the divine between. Here, the divine between comes as a consequence of work, like analytical work. As you know, Jungian psychology is very much connected with the work going on in the analytical relationship. And this is like that. And what you see here, at the bottom you see the alchemist there on the left with the right with his Sora Mystica. And it's unclear how many, most of the alchemists were men, of course, except the initial one. The alchemist was Maria Prophetessa, who was a reincarnation of Miriam. And so there were women around doing the alchemy as well. So we don't know exactly whether the Sora Mystica, the mystical sister in the work, was an actual person or not. But there's a feminine presence, and here you see it that way, where the two are working together on their knees, and they're transforming that gross matter, namely themselves. And he's praying and she's praying, but she's also pointing, as the anima does, to the above. Because while they're working on the transformation of themselves, above are these two angels who are holding an athanor, holding a vessel. You see it there. And in that vessel there is this figure who is alternately Mercurius or a god who's holding these two children. And those two children are the parallel of those of the alchemist and his mystical sister. So they're working to transform themselves and God, and the child aspects are being transformed at the same time while these two angels are participating in that. So while you're doing the work, there's this other couple going on inside, out there, which is the experience in analysis. You have the two, and you have the anima and the animus, or other archetypal figures are present at the same time. And above it all is the sun, the symbol of consciousness. So it's the divine sun, or the divine light, is supervising all of that. Okay. Now, for the rest of the day, we'll be doing heavier stuff. Just longer, that's all. The first example of the divine within comes from Zen Buddhism. The series is called the Ox Herding series. Any of you familiar with it? Oh, you do? Okay. Well, this is a wonderful series. I know for me it was central. When I came back from Zurich in 1959 and thrown into all that stuff and was no longer in paradise, I was feeling pretty dry. And I came upon these. I was reading this book by Suzuki. It was a manual for the Zen Buddhist monk. I wasn't planning to be a monk, but I was reading that stuff. And in that manual, he had these pictures. It's these Zen ox herding pictures, which is a path to enlightenment. And I saw those, and it was like the water flowing again, as you'll see. These are extraordinary. This is the 15th century. There had been other ox herding series of pictures back as far as the 13th century, but this was by a religious genius named Kakwan, who and with Puming, who wrote, I think, the poems, but he did the extended series with the commentaries, and it's an extraordinary thing. So this is how it begins, and if you look at this, you see how many of you know the Rosarian pictures that Jung uses in the psychology of the transference? Yeah, many of you do. Well, this is a parallel. You see, that's the parallel in alchemy to self-transformation that the ox herding pictures are in Buddhism. And you see the difference. This picture, these pictures there's a single figure of a boy in a circle in a square. In alchemy, there is no frame in the alchemical Rosarian pictures, because that work was not in the structure. In the Zen, you see, meditation, working toward enlightenment, was part of the culture. You could legitimately even expect it to do that, to go off and meditate and do that self-transformation for hundreds of years. So here it's contained. You have a frame. There's no frame on the other. And in the alchemy one, the first picture it just has these snakes spitting at each other and venom. There are no people. And then the next picture has a king and a queen. Here you start in the Zen series. You start with a boy. You start with one figure that goes all the way through, vanishes, comes back, And at the end, there are two figures. There's the old man and the young boy looking just like this again. So this is a very different thing. That mostly men alone. But the feminine in this series is everything around it. Nature, all of that. The feminine is presented as a principle, where the masculine is presented as the person undergoing this transformation. This doesn't mean that women can't do this. I mean, you can have your own animus doing this as well. Anyhow, here is the first picture. And you see here's this boy, and around him a tree. By the way, a tree is almost every picture, which we'll talk about later on. And nature is there. Now, the first picture is called Searching for the Ox. Can you read it there? Oh, great. Okay, I'll read it. You can read it with me. The beast has never gone astray, and what is the use of searching for him? The reason the oxherd is not on intimate terms with him is that the oxherd himself has violated his own inmost nature. The beast is lost, for the oxherd has himself been let out of the way through his deluding senses. His home is receding farther away from him, and byways and crossways are ever confused. Desire for gain and fear of loss burn like fire. Ideas of right and wrong spring up like a phalanx. Sounds pretty modern, doesn't it? 15th century? Amazing. The beast has never gone astray. See, the ox is a symbol of the self. In Chinese, the word for ox is the same, male, female. It's all the same. It's not gendered. And it's really this symbol of the self. The beast hasn't gone astray. What's the use of looking for him? You say, why do you even start? Later on, he should stay home. Why are you starting this path at all? Why are you in analysis? You're perfectly fine the way you are. Well, you're there because, you're stuck. You need some help. That's why. So these guys need help too, but they do it meditating and using these pictures. Okay, he says here, the reason the ox herd is not on intimate terms with the ox is the ox herd himself has violated his own inmost nature. Yeah, this is fantastic. This is the reason. You're cut off from your own inmost nature, which is the ox too. The beast is lost, for the ox herd has himself been led out of the way through his deluding senses. You say that you're confused by all your senses. You're cut off from the inside. Okay. His home is receding farther away from him, and byways and crossways are ever confused. Desire for gain and fear of loss burn like fire. Ideas of right and wrong spring up like a phalanx. Think of that. Desire for gain and fear of loss. We're all stuck with that all the time. That's the modern man's condition. And ideas of right and wrong. Judgment, endlessly judging. You didn't do this right, you do that right, you want this and you want. This is 15th century. This is the condition, the ripe condition for starting on the path to enlightenment. Okay, and here's the poem. Alone in the wilderness, lost in the jungle, the boy is searching. The swelling waters, the faraway mountains, the unending path. Exhausted and in despair, he knows not where to go. He only hears the evening cicadas singing in the maple woods. So beautiful. So he's lost in the jungle, he's searching. The swelling waters, which is the unconscious, happens a lot in your dreams. There's a flood about to come in. The unconscious has been neglected and now starting to flood. The faraway mountains, the symbol of individuation on that path to the heights of getting enlightened, and the unending path. Exhausted and in despair, he knows not where to go. But he hears evening cicadas. You see these little insects. That's the intuition from nature itself, singing in the maple woods. Okay, we're going to proceed now to the second picture. First, though, I have to tell you, at the break, somebody came up and told me that my son had a message from my son. First, I got scared. He just said to congratulate me on Father's Day, which is a relief. But I have to tell you, last night, I got a call. You were not here on Friday night. I told the story of my first big experience before I was 4 years old. And I was living in East LA and had a big experience. And part of that was a little neighbor girl that was my friend named Gracie. And of course, I moved away when I was 4, and I didn't hear from Gracie again until I was 84. And she found me, and we had breakfast a few times. We talked and stuff, and then I called her about a year ago And there was no answer, and I thought she died. Well, she called me last night to wish me Happy Father's Day. So, and she's an older woman. But I was 3 and she was 5. It's very nice. Anyway, I thought that was auspicious too. Happy Father's Day. Okay. Okay, we're now in the second picture. If you look at the picture, you can see in the background, there's now the mountain. Remember before in the first picture we talked about the mountain is far away. The mountain is a symbol of individuation. It appears later on again. But now for the first time the mountain appears in the series. Now the second picture is called Seeing the Traces. And here's what it says. By the aid of the sutras, and by inquiring into the doctrines, he has come to understand something. He has found the traces. He now knows that vessels, however varied, are all of gold, that the objective world is a reflection of the self. Yet he is unable to distinguish what is good from what is not. His mind is still confused as to truth and falsehood. As he has not yet entered the gate, he is provisionally said to have noticed the traces. Okay. By the aid of the sutras and by inquiring into the doctrines, he has come to understand something. He has found the traces. What's that? It's the sutras. You have to read your Bible. You have to read the material at hand where the traces of the divine have already been shown. You see, whatever religion you're dealing with, this is the work of religious geniuses over hundreds and hundreds of years, and this is the stuff's there. So if you're starting your path, you start reading. You read your Bible, you read your Quran, you read all that. So if you read all that, you see the traces of the divine. You see, you were lost before, you were cut off. But now you just see the traces of it. He now knows, this is fantastic, that vessels, however varied, are all of gold, and that the objective world is a reflection of the self. 15th century, that all vessels are of gold, all the religions are of gold, all the spiritual, they're all of gold, they all carry that, and that the objective world itself that has blocked you from yourself is also a reflection of the self. It's all the self. In the end, you say, why are you doing it? It's all the self. Yeah, but I have to find out myself. You know, you can't, it's a true, but you don't know it until you do the work. But this is what's saying, as you start the path, that it's all the self. Yet, he is unable to distinguish what is good from what is not. His mind is still confused as to truth and falsehood. As he has not yet entered the gate, he is provisionally said to have noticed the traces. So he has a taste of what's what by doing all the books. Now, here's the poem. By the stream and under the trees, scattered are the traces of the lost. The sweet-scented grasses are growing thick. Did he find the way? However remote over the hills and far away the beast may wander, his nose reaches the heavens, and none can conceal it. It's beautiful. You see, also in nature are scattered are the traces of the lost. So when you're in that condition, go walk in the forest, and you'll experience it. The sweet-scented grasses are growing thick. In other words, if you do that, like you go into nature, everybody does. Everybody, unless you're totally lost, you feel something of the divine in nature. Okay, is that the way? Just to being in nature. But however remote over the hills, the beast may. But you don't have the beast yet. You have just nature. But no matter how far away he is, it's still present. It's the beast that reaches the heavens. In other words, from the lowest level, of the instinctive level where the animal is, to the heavens, none can seal it. The ox is reaching both places. Okay, but he still hasn't seen the ox. You see, by the way, the tree is still present in the second picture. Third picture, please. Is it up there? Seeing the ox. Okay, there you see it now. There's no mountain. Why no mountain? Because the ox is the mountain, really. It's part of the individuation. But the tree is there, and he's running after the ox. He says, seeing the ox. The boy finds the way by the sound he hears. He sees thereby into the origin of things, and all his senses are in harmonious order. In all his activities, it is manifestly present. It is like the salt in water and the glue in color. It is there. though not distinguishable as an individual entity. When the eye is properly directed, he will find that it is no other than himself. This is a Jungian Buddhist. The boy finds his way by the sound he hears. He sees thereby into the origin of things. The sound would be the intuition you get about what comes to you. And now his senses they're in order now. It's no longer this confusion of the senses. It's always present. He gets a sense of it's always present. But where is it? When it's properly directed, the eye, it's himself. He's the issue. The ox is inside you. That's where you struggle. Okay. On a yonder branch perches a nightingale cheerfully singing. The sun is warm, and a soothing breeze blows. On the bank the willows are green. The ox is there all by himself. Nowhere is he to hide himself. The splendid head decorated with stately horns, what painter can reproduce him? Okay, now we find the animal. Instead of the cicada of the previous picture is now the nightingale, with this much more melodious voice and much more powerful. The sun is warm and is smooth. It's as if then he's feeling in harmony with nature. But the ox is there now. No longer. What this says here, the splendid head decorated with stately horns. What does he really see? You see any splendid head with stately horns? You see the rear end of the damn ox. And that's it. Do you see, when you start on the path of work, you don't see the stately horn you deal with the shadow. Your shadow and the shadow of the self. It's your dark side and the dark side of self. That's what appears first. Okay. But here he's sort of encouraged by the poem. The splendid head is still there. What painter can reproduce it? Well, you're not supposed to reproduce him, say the Jews. It's unreproducible. Here it is catching the ox. Now all you see is the seeker, the boy with the ox and the tree. It's interesting. You'll see later on that tree is always hovering. Okay, long lost in the wilderness, the boy has at last found the ox, and his hands are on him. But owing to the overwhelming pressure of the outside world, the ox is hard to keep under control. Amazing. He constantly longs for the old sweet-scented field. The wild nature is still unruly and altogether refuses to be broken. If the oxherd wishes to see the ox completely in harmony with himself, he has surely to use the whip freely. Okay. So he's finally found, which from the previous picture, it's your own nature you're dealing with, your own animal nature you're struggling with. Okay, so you're ready to do the work. But this is fantastic. Owing to the overwhelming pressure of the outside world, the ox is hard to keep under control. In other words, how can you keep on struggling with your own lusts and desires and angers and all that when all this stuff's going on outside? You have your responsibilities, you have all these things going on. So it's hard to really, that's why people go off alone, to be a hermit, to be able to struggle alone with this without that external pressure. Okay. And he, namely the ox and the oxherd, constantly long for the old sweet-scented field. What does that mean? We want to stay unconscious. You see, and that's why, and they're saying, in effect, yeah, you can stay unconscious. If you realize that the self is everywhere and you're part of it, yeah, just live your life. You don't have to go on to this, series of transformation. But the wild nature is still unruly and altogether refuses to be broken. So all your efforts, your meditation and your fasting and your goodwill and your working with your dreams and your active imagination and your boom, bam, you're back. You see, for those of you know, and then you get these disgusting dreams, and and that's part of it. That's the hind end of the ox. Okay, and you have to use the whip freely. There has to be that discipline. This is also related, as Suzuki says, to meditating. In other words, how many of you meditate? All of you do. Yeah, there are, of course, many varieties. I'll teach you one at the end that you don't know, a Kabbalistic one. And the circumcision comes later. And they have a certain commonality, but a difference. And here, the Zen meditation is coming to this the place of no mind, right? And this is to keep that discipline. So what they do, your thoughts come and interfere, is not to follow them, is to come back to being centered, come back to being. So that effort of coming back to being centered helps you to get centered. Okay. Okay, here's the poem. With the energy of his whole being, the boy has at last taken hold of the ox. How wild, but how wild his will, how ungovernable his power. At times he struts up a plateau, when lo, he is lost again in a misty, unpenetrable mountain pass, which is a poetic description of what happens. Strutting up the plateau is again the inflation that, was mentioned before. I arrived. Ah, Lord, you have spoken to me. I'm chosen. You laugh. Some of you know about that. Okay, so it's really hard to do that work. Next picture, which is really amazing. You look at it there, you see now, there's the ox, and there is the ox herd herding the ox. The tree's still there, you see. And there's no mountain. The mountain is really in the ox. Okay, now this is the herding of the ox. And he says, when a thought moves, another follows, and then another. An endless train of thoughts is thus awakened. Through enlightenment, all this turns into truth. But falsehood asserts itself when confusion prevails. Things oppress us not because of an objective world, but because of a self-deceiving mind. 15th century. Do not let the nose string loose, hold it tight, and allow no vacillation. See, here again you have really further reference. You see, when you meditate, these thoughts come in. One thought comes, and then another, and another. Okay. An endless train of thoughts is thus awakened. Through enlightenment, this all turns into truth. But there's confusion. You see, it's interesting that in psychoanalysis, you follow the free associations. You follow where it all leads. Okay. In Jungian work, you do active imagination. You relate to the image of the thought. Here, you try to get to emptiness. Is to transcend it all. And the things oppress us not because of objective world, because of a self-deceiving mind. In other words, it's our projections, our foolishness, our misapprehending the outer world. That's the problem, not the world. Again, this is like, you remember that in the Rainmaker? It's if you're in trouble, it's your fault. That can be oppressive and wrong. But this is what it's saying. You're being confused as to your own self-deceiving mind. Hold tight until you get the enlightenment. The boy is not to separate himself with his whip and tether, lest the animal should wander away into a world of defilements. When the ox is properly tended to, he will grow pure and docile. Without a chain, nothing binding, he will by himself follow the ox herd. Okay. So you have to keep that discipline going. Okay. If you keep connected that way, the ox is tamed. And ultimately, without binding, he will by himself follow the ox herd. Here you have it, here you have the end state where he's following the ox herd. Do you notice anything else about the picture? I'm sorry? No mountain. Yeah, the mountain, all of the individuation part is still in the ox. You'll see later on. Anything else? Look at the ox.
Turned around.
It's white. Do you see? And this is not the trick of the photography or anything. This is the whitening of the ox. You see, remember in alchemy, there's a whole series, the transformation of this degrado, of the darkness of your own soul into its purification. This is what's shown here. There are pictures, earlier ones, before this man, where the whole thing has to do with the whitening of the ox. And there's one last picture where there's a circle. Here it's happened. There's already a transformation. Okay. Any thought? Question? Okay. Okay, next. That's a beauty, isn't it? You see a bit of a tree and still no mountain. And you see, this is called Coming Home on the Ox's Back. There's the ox herd sitting on the back, he's playing a flute, and the ox is looking up and smiling. Okay. The struggle is over. The man is no more concerned, with gain and loss. He hums a rustic tune of the woodman. He sings simple songs of the village boy. Saddling himself on the ox's back, his eyes are fixed on things not of the earthy. Even if he is called, he will not turn his head. However enticed, he will no more be kept back. Okay, the struggle is over. The man is no more concerned with gain and loss. Up till now, he's been a boy. Now he's a man. Do you see what that entails? In other words, to become a man, to be an adult, you need to be in charge of your instincts, right? And that's, the same with a woman. Until you're, except in women, usually marriage is the big thing that makes the difference, which has another meaning. But he's no more concerned with gain and loss. This is a huge achievement. He hums the rustic tune of the woodman. You see, he's playing his flute, which has to do with feeling. And he's not using the reins at all. No reins. What do you make of that? Saddling himself, the ox's back, his eyes are fixed on things not of the earthy. He and the ox are in harmony. They are one. And the ox itself brings him back home. In other words, if you follow the self, we've done that transformation and connection with the instincts and the body and the body-soul union, you can follow that then as the self. You can follow it. Think about this of the ox and what we do in the West with the ox. Has anybody been to a bullfight? Okay. Well, there the mastery of the ox, there the sword is different. It's to kill the ox. Okay? It's not to be in harmony with the ox. It's to kill it. Except, of course, in Spain it has a different. If you've been in Spain or Mexico, there is a harmony of the matador with himself and the ox. And he knows at the end that he and the ox are one. This is not generally understood. But the matador knows that. That in his self-mastery, he's also connected with that ox. And in the killing of that ox, he's killing something in himself as well. So he's in harmony with the ox. So it's not meant as just a killing of an animal. It's not a slaughter. But this is very different. You see, but this is the West. We're going to master it. We're going to control it. We're going to do this. We're going to conquer the world. See, well, this is going on where the East are doing their meditation and their introversion. The West is beginning to conquer the world. Get your ship and go around the world and conquer people. Conquer the Africans and conquer the Asian. We're into conquering. That's a huge difference. So it's the extroversion of the West to mastery versus the introversion of the East into self-mastery. Now, in our century, it's changing, isn't it? Because now the East is in wanting to master things. And we're flooded with Eastern methods of meditation and so on. So there's more of that interplay in the world now, in a sense of the fusion of both. But this is very notable. Are you moved by this picture? Okay, let me read the poem now. Riding on the animal, he leisurely wends his way home. Enveloped in the evening mist, how tunefully the flute vanishes away. Singing a ditty, beating time, his heart is filled with a joy indescribable. That he is now one of those who know need to be told. See, right there he is riding. He leisurely wends his way home. Okay, so he's with the feeling. He's with his emotion. He's with this union, and he has this. His heart is filled with joy, and he's singing. The boy has now changed from a boy. He's become a man. He's become a man, but the boy has expressed as in the tune. He's singing youthfully. The song he sings is that of the village boy. Okay, but now he's filled with joy indescribable, and now he's one of those who know. This is enlightenment. That's it. Okay, we're all through. Would you settle for this?
Yeah.
I think most of the time you would. Okay. Next picture. The ox forgotten, leaving the man alone. The ox forgotten, no more ox. And what do you see? Here's the guy, no ox. You see him there with his hut, like the rainmaker's hut. And now what do you see? You got the mountain back. You see, the ox is no longer the carrier of the individuation. He has internalized that ox, really. Okay, let's read. The ox forgotten, leaving the man alone. The dharmas are one, and the ox is symbolic. When you know what you need is not the snare or set net, but the hare or fish, it is like gold separated from the dross. It is like the moon rising out of the clouds. The one ray of light serene and penetrating shines even before days of creation. That's beautiful, isn't it? The dharmas are one and the ox is symbolic. You know, the dharma means the path, justice, all, you know, the proper way, right? They're all one. It's all united. And here they say, this is 15th century. The ox is symbolic. I mean, we're not there now to realize that the ox is symbolic. And then we'd say, when you know that what you need is not the snare or set net, but the hare or fish. You don't need the technique or the method and meditation and all that. You need the concrete object. That's the interesting part. You need the real thing. And what do we mean by the real thing? It's convincing. It's a genuine experience. You experience the hare. You experience the enlightenment. You know, as I say that, I'm feeling energy in my hands, which we call the subtle body. Are you familiar with that? Okay. Which is, that subtle body is a symbol of the union of the spirit and the flesh. And that's the self. The self is sort of saying to me, yeah, you did it right, Marvin. Okay. And that's it. This is the real thing. So when you experience the real thing, you don't need the technique or the theory or any of that. Okay. But you need all that in order to get there. Okay. And when you do it, the gold is separated from the dross. Then you have the gold. And it's like the moon rising out of the clouds. It's interesting. Here it has the moon rising out of the clouds. In the poem it has the sun. See, the sun and the moon are always present in these individuation things. They're the masculine and feminine principles. And the moon rising is carrying that feminine principle. The one ray of light serene and penetrating shines even before days of creation. In other words, you're back to the source even before creation. You see, it's interesting. In Buddhism, you need to get back. You need to get to the face before you were born. Are you familiar with that? Okay. In psychoanalysis, you need to get your face just after you were born. And in Jungian stuff, you got to get to when your grandfather was born. Because you have the weight of all that evolution you have to work out. You know, all the mistakes of everybody, including you. Okay. The one ray of light serene and penetrating shines even before days of creation. It's a powerful image. You'll see this when we come to Kabbalah too. That light that penetrates is a very important image. It's an image of consciousness which gets to the source. And you see, ultimately, all of these are aiming at consciousness. But the ultimate, when you're through with all that, you really come to love. Because when I read to you the poem of Ibn al-Arabi, and it's curious, and I think this is because this is a male thing. All these attempts at improving your consciousness, higher consciousness, are mostly by men, where women were experiencing the divine in the structure and in love. That was the whole central fact. Now that's been changing now for a long time, for about 200 years, but that's what it is. Probably somebody's going to want to object about that. I'll give you a chance to do that in a minute. Riding on the animal, he is at last back at his home, where lo, the ox is no more. The man alone sits serenely. Though the red sun is high up in the sky, he is still quietly dreaming. Under a straw-thatched roof are his whip and rope idly lying. So that's again very beautiful. See, the ox is no more. He sits serenely. Now it's the red sun is up in the sky. but he's still quietly dreaming. See, now you can be with your dreams without all this concern. And no more of this discipline, whip and rope. You know, if you're in harmony with the self, you don't worry that much about it all. What do you think? I'm sure there's some objection to what I said before. This observation about the historical element in the West. That these spiritual paths are essentially developed by men. And as men, the big thing for them, and they're underlying that is the male principle. And the male principle is logos, consciousness. And the female principle is eros, is love. So all these ways are a way to get the consciousness. Enlightenment means to be enlightened, to have that ultimate consciousness. But the love is what emerges after that. As I said to you, I read before, that you know later on, as Ibn al-Arabi said, wherever love's camels take you. I love that line. That the animal, but the animals belong to love, and that's where it takes you. And see, if this had been done in totally matriarchal societies, it would look very different. When we come to Hinduism, you'll see it's rather different. You see here, the feminine principle through all this is around. It's the picture itself. It's nature. You know, it's not a focus. And we come to the Hinduism. You have God and Goddess all the way through. So each of these religions also contribute a different element. They differentiate some things rather than other. See, this is so great because it has that riding the ox's back with no hands. That's wonderful, wonderful image. And this too. I mean, these last images are. I mean, to me, they were life-giving when I came upon them. And you see, he's sitting there. He's meditating, praying, and he's now facing the image of individuation, the mountain. Worshipping, even, you'd say. Okay, next one. The ox and the man both going out of sight. And amazing, isn't it? All you see is a big circle there, empty circle. The ox and the man both going out of sight. All confusion is set aside, and serenity alone prevails. Even the idea of holiness does not obtain. He does not linger about where the Buddha is, and as to where there is no Buddha, he speedily passes by. When there exists no form of dualism, even a thousand-eyed one fails to detect a loophole. A holiness before which birds offer flowers is but a farce. It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah. The ox and the man both gone out of sight. What do you make of that? The ego and the self are both gone. Everything is gone here into null, into the void. All confusion is, and now serenity alone prevails. You see, there is serenity exists. Peace. Even the idea of holiness does not obtain. See, as soon as you have an idea of holiness, there's also already a duality. This is holy and that's not. He does not linger about where the Buddha is, and as to where there is no Buddha, he speedily passes by. That's the most interesting place. You don't hang around where the presumed holy men are and all that. You keep going, and when it's clearly not there, get out, man. When there exists no form of dualism, even a thousand-eyed one fails to detect a loophole. So it's that utter, total union. Now, how often do you see that? How often you don't experience that too often? You have that only usually, at least for me, periods of time. That's or maybe some of you feel it all the time. See, because I think it's the nature of the psyche to unite and then separate and then unite it, so you're endlessly somewhere. Increasing consciousness and capacity. But I love this final line. A holiness before which birds offer flowers is but a farce. There was a song like that in the 60s, I forgot, by one of the poems of Leonard Cohen, a beautiful song, where the birds are bringing flowers to an altar. It's ridiculous. Very sweet to hear of it, but it's ridiculous. That's not the bird's nature. Okay? Birds don't offer flowers. Right? In other words, you're in touch with your true nature, which is divine. Divine and human. Okay, sermon's over, let's continue. All is empty, the whip, the rope, the man, and the ox. Who can ever survey the vastness of heaven? Over the furnace burning ablaze, not a flake of snow can fall. When this state of things obtains, manifest is the spirit of the ancient master. It's beautiful. I worked with a Buddhist priest, a Japanese one, not our colleague, not Miyuki, another man. And he was reading my first book, in which there was a story of a Ronin, and I wanted to get his opinion. And he said, knights, all that stuff, it's all one, you know. The whip, the rope, the man, the oxes, it's all one. You're separating it out unnecessarily. Who can ever survey the vastness of heaven? Over the furnace burning ablaze, not a flake of... You see, when you have that fire, that flame you're connected with, there is nothing that can change it. When this state of things obtains, manifests as the spirit of the ancient master. In other words, you're in that place of wholeness and stillness. The ancient master, the self appears. Also, you see in the East, you have the guru and his guru. He has a picture of his guru behind him, and that guru, you know, and that's, I like that tradition. In our tradition, we have the Oedipus complex. You kill your own man. You see, you know, it's endlessly, it's like the conquest always. You don't rest on tradition, you know, to develop it. No, you got the new thing. Okay, well, the last picture was the mandala, a circle, and you'd think that's the end. You know, what more than that can you have? And as I said to you, there are many ox herding series which end with that empty circle. But Kakwan's genius is to go on with it. And this is the next one. It's called Returning to the Origin, Back to the Source. So there's something beyond the circle, something beyond the emptiness. And you see here now you see the tree is the center. No man, no ox, no nothing. Just the tree with two big circles in the trunk there, two empty circles. So you can see as if that beyond emptiness, beyond the self is void, that the source is nature. This is China and Japan, where nature is so central. Okay, let's read together. From the very beginning, pure and immaculate, the man has never been affected by defilement. He watches the growth of things while himself abiding in the immovable serenity of non-assertion. He does not identify himself with the Maya-like transformations that are going on about him, nor has he any use of himself, which is artificiality. The waters are blue, the mountains are green. Sitting alone, he observes things undergoing changes. Interesting image, unaffected. From the very beginning, pure and immaculate, the man has not been affected. What does that say? He's saying, despite all these things, he's at that core. That core has been untouched. What you do is you get back to that core, and it is as it always was and always will be. So it's as if that depth of enlightenment has brought him to that place. And now he watches the things. You see, there's the impersonality of himself, watching things happening around him, not being identified with any changes. You know, looking for this, wanting that, not wanting that. Now, how many of you there all the time? Like 10 minutes. That's it's a wonderful. I'm sure you've all experienced it too, but for brief periods. The serenity of non-assertion. Somebody spoke earlier about the issue of transforming aggression. There is a serenity of non-assertion. There's not an ego here to assert itself, to make itself known or desire or whatnot. He does not identify himself with the Maya-like transformations that are going, nor has he any use of himself. That's interesting. He has no use of himself. Can you understand what that's like? See, there's a story, a Zen story about this. There's a forest, all the trees are chopped down except for this one tree. And this one asked the tree, how come you were never, chopped down? He said, well, the other trees are useful. This one's very beautiful, that's good for wood. I'm not useful nor beautiful. So I have no use for myself. Therefore, I'm left standing. Can we grasp that? It's as if even the idea of being useful is being back in the dualism. See, this is a heavy thing in this Buddhism, is to overcome dualism in its entirety, in every way. Not a breath. You remember before, it's the fire, the flaming fire, and a snowflake falls, it just dissolves. This is what that's here, to be utterly non-dualistic. Okay. The waters are blue, the mountains are green. Sitting alone, he observes things undergoing changes. You know the old story that on the way to enlightenment, when you start out, the waters are blue, our house is a house, and mountains are green. And on your part way to enlightenment, it all changes. Mountains are no longer mountains. Trees are no longer trees. You're familiar with that. Things aren't what they've seen before. Everything changes. And then after you're enlightened, mountains are mountains, trees are trees. You're back to the initial condition, but presumably in a changed place. You have this enlightened consciousness, which makes all the difference. Now, here's the poem. To return to the origin, to be back at the source, already a false step this. Far better it is to stay at home, blind and deaf, and without much ado. Sitting in the hut, he takes no cognizance of things outside. Behold, the streams flowing, whither nobody knows, and the flowers vividly red. For whom are they? Interesting questions, huh? See, to return to the origin, already a false step. Better to stay at home, blind and deaf. See, it's like saying, why did you start on this path at all? This is so Zen. Why are you here? Then he hits the guy. That's my master. He hit me. Because you're better off in your naturalness than to take on this path. It's all illusion. This very Easter, it's hard for us to grasp, isn't it? Sitting in the hut, he takes no cognizance of things outside. You see, he's totally in this introverted position, but he can do so because he's sitting in the hut. You see, he's not. You'll see, this is not the last picture. That's why it's so special. It's the next to last. But I think what is notable here is now, the ox went out of sight, the man went out of sight, but now we have the tree. The tree doesn't go out of sight, and it has two mandalas, two empty holes. It's as if the tree as the great symbol of the self, right? The great maternal tree out of which the hero was born, out of which nature comes. So the tree is the great symbol. In all the religions, in Kabbalah, the tree of life is central. In Hinduism, the Jesus cross is a tree. So it's as if this experience of the tree and next to the stone, which is even more eternal, the tree carries that sense of eternity and unaffectedness. Okay. Any thought? Okay, this is the last, the 10th picture. It's interesting. The 10, as I mentioned, is a very powerful number. It's a symbol of totality in a way that 4 is not. And that'll be clearer when we get to Kabbalah. But it combines 1 and 0. 0 being the utter absolute, and 1 is everything, the opposite. Anyway, we'll get to that later. Here's the picture, and you see things are very different. No mountain, no bull, and here we have the tree. Still, the tree is presiding over everything, covering, and you see the young boy, young man, is now an old man, and he's back entering the city with bliss-bestowing hands. So he's back into the world, back into the collective. And now he's not alone anymore. You see, there's a boy there with him who looks very much like he looked in the beginning, right? It suggests that he's now back to teach or to carry on in some way. But here he comes back. You can see he's holding his staff, and a gourd, and this big bundle on his back, all these goodies. He's like Mithras, carrying all these goodies back into the world, and he has a big belly. And he's the enlightened man, isn't he? But look at that big belly and that bald head. So, do you think he looks much like Jesus? Very different. This is East and West, so different. See, in Christianity, the divinity is in the heart. Jesus is in your heart. And in the East, the Buddha and the Enlightened One is in the belly. They're different centers. Okay. His thatched cottage is closed, and even the wisest know him not. No glimpses of his inner life are to be caught, for he goes on his own way without following the steps of the ancient sages. Carrying a gourd, he goes out into the market. Leaning against a staff, he comes home. He is found in company with wine bibbers and butchers. He and they are all converted into Buddhas. How do you like them apples? Okay. His thatched cottage gate is closed, and even the wisest know him not. What do you make of that? No glimpses of his inner life are to be caught, for he goes on his own way without following the steps of the ancient sages. You see, that's it. Well, remember the previous one, if you don't hang around where the Buddha is, you don't go searching after the Buddha, that you're now at one, and holiness doesn't obtain. He doesn't even follow the ancient sages. He's not even a Jungian anymore. That's hard for a Westerner. We need to be part of some tradition. Also in the East, they like that. They want to be. But he, carrying a gourd, he goes out into the market, leaning against a staff, he comes home. So he has his container, the gourd with goodies that he brings into the world. Okay. And he has his own staff, standing in his own place, he comes back home. So he goes in and out from his own world to the other world, back and forth. He is found in company with wine bibbers and butchers. That's very important. See, wine bibbers and butchers are sort of lower class. You know, butchers eat meat and all that, and they're not very well thought of. And another picture is with prostitutes. It's like Jesus is with the ordinary people. You see, he's the sage here is in the company of ordinary people. He doesn't have a place at the university. It's an interesting vision, isn't it? And this is amazing now. He and they are all converted into Buddhas. You see, he's entering the city with bliss-bestowing hands. So he has that subtle body, that energy, that capacity to bring bliss or enlightenment. So in his presence, this is an extreme figure, that we're all converted into Buddhas through his very presence. It's an amazing thing. If you're looking at that picture, would that be somebody that you feel you would be so entranced by?
Bodhisattva.
Yes.
More like Falstaff.
More like what?
More like Falstaff.
Falstaff?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's closer.
Full of life.
Right.
And people that eat and drink.
Very good. Can you stand up, whoever said that? Right, thank you. Because Falstaff is a shadow of Henry V. You know, Henry V, remember, Falstaff is his buddy, and they're wonderful, having a wonderful time. And then, of course, Henry V has to take over the job, and he betrays his old friend. He has to serve the collective. This guy doesn't serve any collective, doesn't serve anything. You see, but that's it. If you're in that collective and have a role in it, this guy cannot be president of the United States. Of Egypt, maybe. But, okay, here's the poem. Bare-chested and barefooted, he comes out into the marketplace. Daubed with mud and ashes, how broadly he smiles. There is no need for the miraculous power of the gods. For he touches, and lo, the dead trees are in full bloom. It's miraculous, isn't it? Bare-chested and barefooted. I mean, he's exposed, not protected. And his feet are close to the earth. Daubed with mud and ashes. You see, I mean, he's part of the ordinary darkness of life. He's not pure and apart in any way. How broadly he smiles. So he has that sort of inner joy. There is no need, this is important, there is no need for the miraculous power of the gods. See, it's as if the gods altogether are now transcended, the sages of the gods. And he's like my atheist patient. And I think my atheist patient's going to get there. But he doesn't know I know that. He's still battling. But he's going to come to this his way. But there are never no gods anyway, you see. But he's a serious worker, totally working with the inner world all the time. And people come from different ways. I mean, I've seen, as someone here knows, I've worked with a lot of religious, with priests and nuns, and some rabbis, not many. They don't come to me because I'm Jewish. You're supposed to laugh. In Hindus, and also obvious people are not religious. And everybody comes to it their own way. That's the wonder of the work. So if you're in this work, our task is to help the person connect with their own soul, not with some ism or any belief system. So he touches and the dead trees are in full bloom. Again, the tree at the end. I'm so moved by that. The tree is in the beginning and the tree is in the end. And my first big book was called The Tree. And, I didn't know it. The Tree, that was a book in which 10 people from different backgrounds, faiths, meet in paradise. And they each tell their story of individuation. It's now at your favorite bookstore. I think we have it here. Do we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's the story. That's the wonderful story. 15th century. Next, we're going into Hinduism, and particularly Kundalini Yoga. How many have had some experience along those lines? And you want to lecture for me? It's a lot of you. See, this is amazing, because when I came across Kundalini Yoga in 1956 in Zurich, where my analyst was giving a course on basic principles of Jungian psychology, and he used this as a framework, and it blew my mind. This was really something interesting to see. And at that time, there was a lot of discussion: is this all theoretical, or is there really energy that's going on? This was a whole discussion. Is this quote really happening or not? And I don't hear that discussion anymore. It's either you experience the energy or you don't, It's funny, but in 50 years, it's changed a lot. Okay. Well, Kundalini. I use here this diagram of the stages of Kundalini Yoga. Is the diagram up? Oh, yeah. I draw from a very good book called The Serpent Power by Arthur Avalon. Do you know it? Excellent book, because he has in there not all the stuff, but he has some others from Purnananda, other commentators about this path. And he has this diagram, except for the psychological commentary you see in each place. And I've been, some of that comes from Jung and some of that comes from me. But that's what it's about. There it is. It's Indian religion is ancient and rich and incredible. How many have been to India? God, everybody's been everywhere. I mean, what is? Well, then I mean, it's. I was there in '44 in the Merchant Marine, and I was a month in Calcutta, and I went to the Temple of Kali a lot. But the whole it's just the opposites are so obvious. There's tremendous poverty and tremendous wealth of the spirit. But even the very poor have a certain cultural development. You know, they're born into something with a rich heritage, and you can feel it if you're there. I went, to the theater, the music and dance, and it's just you're enraptured by that. Or you felt that too, those of you who've been there, yeah. So it's an extraordinary place. And it's so different. You say, I should have gone Hinduism first and then Buddhism, because Buddhism was a reaction to those riches. Just, all that stuff. It's a polytheism, monotheism, everything. And Buddhism was to simplify everything. Don't let, get focused, no thoughts, just, no gods, no goddesses, And it's just opposite. As you'll see, this makes use of all that multiplicity to arrive at the enlightenment. Okay, you can have a look. We'll go through these. The way it works is that the Kundalini, as you probably know, is a snake. And it refers to the energy in the spinal column that goes from roughly the level of the anus all the way to the top of the head. And there are two nadis on both sides of the spine, Ida and Pingala, one is feminine and one is masculine, Ida and Pingala. And the central column is called Sushumna. It's a dead ringer for Kabbalah, has something the same way. It's this kind of experience or intuition is very similar. And, the sadhaka, who is the seeker, starts his meditation, and he focuses on each of these chakras as he moves up and transforms himself. Now, the first one is called Muladhara, which you can see it there, can you, very well? Oh, good, you see it. Root support. It's the foundation. And it's located at the perineum between the anus and genitals, and has four petals on the mandala there. You see, each one has a mandala. And this mandala, which stands for the wholeness of what is represented, is a square. And the petals are four, so there's a certain solidity that belongs with the root support. The animal that goes with that is the elephant, which is the representative of domesticated libido. The elephant in India carries work, does things. And the elephant is the largest animal on Earth, as you know. Okay, now, as you see, each one of those there's a chakra, the situation where it's located, the mandala and its petals, the animal, which is the instinctive foundation. The next is a tattva, which is a principle. The principle of that one. And then the Shiva and Shakti are the god and goddess and the element that is involved here. The tattva here is cohesion, smell, and feet. Cohesion. At that level, the society hangs together. And at that level, it's not yet activated. The snake, as Jung says, the self is asleep and the ego is awake. And as you go on, it changes forces. The ego goes to sleep and the self is awake. But here it begins with the ego awake, the self asleep. And what you have, the principle of that chakra, is cohesion, holding together. And that's exactly what the family does, the church does, the society. You're born into that collective. And smell, of course, is what brings you. It's close to the earth. And it's linked, very much to the object. And your feet, of course, what keeps you grounded on the ground. Now, the Shiva, in each case, has to do with the masculine principle, and the Shakti is the feminine principle. And these refer to, the Shiva is the form of the universe, and Shakti is the energy. The goddess is the energy, and Shiva is form. And the element is the element you're dealing with here, and here it's the earth, as you might understand. I'll come back in a moment to what the Shiva and Shakti are doing. But first, the psychological significance of this first chakra. It has to do with everyday reality, what you're grown into, you're born into, your family, your work. And the elephant is the domesticated libido. Okay? Now, maybe we can show the picture of the first Muladhara. If you don't mind, I'll be reading to you some of the stuff because it's hard for me to remember what the nature is of the Shiva and Shakti at each chakra. Remember again that Shiva is form, and Shakti is the energy. And the idea is they're like the king and the queen going the way through, the opposites and what they look like. And in the beginning, you see, of course, Shiva is a boy. He's young. He's called Brahma, he's a boy. And the Shakti is Dakini. Now, let me tell you, if I can find it, what they seem like, and you'll get a good picture of it. Okay. So as I said, the divine images are not asleep here. The four-armed goddess of, is she there now? There. Of the Shakti Dakini, there you can't see what she directly, but there she see in the mandala, the two god and goddesses there. She holds a sacrificial spear, a sword, a skull staff, and a drinking cup. She is powerful, yet shows that her energies bespeak the sacrifice and conflict of everyday life, limited by death. You see the sacrificial spear, the skull staff for death, and the drinking cup of life, and the battle of the world. That's everyday life. The goddess, all your energies are contained in that daily life struggle, limited by death. Okay, her energies are contained in the vessel of institutional worship, and addressed as such by everyone. You know, seeing, for example, the Shakti as Kali, and you're in there in that temple in Calcutta, you feel tremendous energy. And of course, there are many, many faces of Kali and of the goddess. And you can feel it's really shaking. You see, it's the energy of the universe, let alone in your own system. Okay. And she is addressed as part of the institutional worship. That's why, have you seen Hindu ritual? It's spectacular. You know, that little god, and you pour milk over all these, it goes on. I think it's why Jung didn't want to hang around. It was too much. It's blinding. It's so rich and powerful. Okay. Okay. Her consort, Shiva, the masculine principle, is presented as child Brahma, also with four hands, which is another symbol of totality. He's holding a staff, a gourd, and malabis, which is already a rosary. He makes fear-dispelling hand gestures. Mudra, like, don't be afraid. You're seeing this goddess scaring the shit out of you. Don't be afraid. This little kid will take care of you. Oh, yeah? Because they're not there to protect you. You'll see in a minute why. The spirit here, Shiva, is yet a child, but holds the community symbols of containment and prayer, evoking a healthy fear of the gods. So at that first level, yes, the banality of everyday life contains the powerful forces of the universe, but we are conscious of them only in a projected or external fashion, revealed in our rituals and unexamined belief. You get that? That's really important. That helps you then really appreciate all the collective rituals in the religion from which you come, because India has this so strongly. Okay? Any question about that? Okay, but at the same time, there's a commentary by Purnananda who says that the sleeping Kundalini is a world bewilderer. Her sweet murmur is like the indistinct hum of swarms of love-mad bees. She produces melodious poetry, not Shakespeare, but other kinds, and all other compositions. It is she who maintains all the beings of the world by means of inspiration and expiration, and shines in the cavity of the root lotus like a chain of brilliant lights. See, that's the equivalent in Hinduism of the poetry that we saw in the ox herding pictures. You see, is the captivating quality of the goddess in this way. And the yogin who meditates upon her will become a king of speech, lord among men, and adept in all kinds of learning. So that's like the contrast of the one starting on the path is different than the one who's contained in the religion. You see this at the very outset. It's interesting. Okay? Okay. So anyone who meditates and thus awakens the sleeping Kundalini is already in touch with the power of love and creation. Knowledge, we find, as with the first ox herding picture, is our initial task of awakening to the self, and our means is that of inner focus. Okay. Any question about that first chakra? Okay, we're back to the diagram into the second chakra. It's called Svadhisthana, which means proper place. And it's located these are plexuses. In the hypogastric bladder, above the genital, below was near the anus, or between the anus and genitals. This is just above the genital, the bladder. Here, the mandala is a crescent, a moon, and its petals are 6. You see, it's increased in complexity. The self now is in this more complex form. The animal is a makara, a crocodile. And that animal is for them, the dangerous one in the water, and the biggest one in the water compared to the elephant on the land. The tattva, the principle of that chakra, is contraction, and it goes with taste and hand. We'll talk about the element of it is water. We'll talk about the god and goddess in a minute. So we go, and the psychological significance is that this is the chakra of the unconscious, experiencing the unconscious, the devouring, dangerous, negative fish monster, the moon, the crescent moon. So, as Jung was so brilliant to know, is that the step in development, when you go up, you really go down. You're going into the water. You go from the earth into the water. You go into your own unconscious, into the depth, where it's flooding. So that's a contraction. So it's in order to really expand ultimately, you need to contract first. And the sense acts here are taste, which focuses you not so much on what you've tasted, but what the taste is. So it's getting to be already more inward looking. And here we have the introduction of, instead of the feet, which keeps you grounded, is the hand. You can grasp something and do something. Now the Shiva and Shakti here are Hari Vishnu, and who is a youth, went from the child, was the main male thing, and the Shakti is Rakini. Can we look at the picture then of the Svadhisthana? So here, when we're meeting the unconscious, we're meeting our primitive, infantile and never-ending desires. They're called klesas. Again, you see, you're always dealing with this. This is the spiritual path. You can't get around it. You don't start with your head and go up. You always have to deal with the instinctive drives first, or ultimately, or you're just staying in the head, nothing happens. So, and the drives have to do with your desires, all the hungers and the lusts and so on, the klesas. The God images here are changed. The Shiva now takes the form of Vishnu in his youth. The spirit form has grown up from the childlike condition in which it began, and the principle under which it operates into one of contraction and narrowing in consciousness. You go down in order to get a higher perspective, and the hand is necessary. Because now you're dealing with the conditions of kama, lust, anger, krodha, and egoism. The youthful deed also suggests the times when these things are especially powerfully activated in our youth, in our adolescence, and so on. And it's interestingly, he's called upon as Hari. I don't know if any of you were around in the 60s. You remember Hare Krishna, or as my Jewish friend said, Hare Krishna. You remember seeing those, the youth? Yeah, you're older than you look. You see, you think that figure, the Hari, or the male prince, will be there to protect us from our greed and demands, but this is not the case. We need him to protect us from the goddess, Rakini, who is indeed very beautiful, but she is a furious aspect. Her 3 eyes are red, and her teeth show fiercely. She is the shining Devi of the Devas, seated on a double lotus, and from one of her nostrils there flows a streak of blood. She is fond of white rice and grants the wished-for boon. Okay, that's what you're dealing with. That's the goddess you're dealing with. That makes the bull look sort of tame, doesn't it? Because they're much closer to the matriarchal place. And the goddess here, Rakini, cleanses us from our greedy faults such as egoism, but she is terrible to behold. It is from her that we need the protection provided by the youthful Hari Vishnu. So we're not protected from our own lusts and so on, but we're protected by her. This is the energy of the universe. You know, you want to take a walk on Saturn? Would that be of interest to you? Or even try Venus? Is that okay? This is heavy stuff. All right, and Jung would say that the divinities of the unconscious, the archetypes, also have a dark and fierce aspect that both challenges us and carries us onward on our path of spiritual development. If we succeed in mastering them, then they do indeed grant us boons. So if you do the work, there are boons. But it's no easy task dealing with all that stuff. Okay. And it's interesting because the gods and goddesses change, and as Jung thinks, see, the gods also change when we do the work. Not only do we change, but the ox changes, or the goddess changes. What we're dealing with, obviously, the ultimate nature of God, we don't even know what it's about. We have no idea about changing that. We just have no conception. But we're dealing with our images of the divine. That's our reality. So the transformation is with those images and with ourselves, not with the ultimate divine. So it's not exactly a hubris to think you're going to change God. That's, of course, an inflation. You're changing the images of God which appear in you. Now, you're all aware of that, I suppose. Anybody who found this out for the first time today? If so, I get a brownie point. Nobody does. Okay. If we go back to the... I'm sorry to make you go around this. Go back to the diagram. The diagram is the third chakra, which is called Manipura. Plenitude of jewels. And it's located in the solar plexus, in the navel region. It's in the diaphragm. Here, the metals have really increased to 10. And the mandala is a triangle. The 3 is the active number in contrast to the even numbers, which are passive. The animal is, interestingly, the ram. You go from the devouring Makara crocodile and the tamed, nice, sweet elephant to a ram, which is, phallic. The tattva principles are expansion, heat, sight, and color with the anus. You see, you go from this, at this point, after going to the contraction and going inside, there is the expansion. And with heat. That's the thing, because in that third chakra, as that, you're dealing with the passion and power. It's the solar plexus. It has there's a crucible there, a triangle form. It has swastikas on both sides, which doesn't have the meaning that it has for us now, but is related to those same kinds of passions. And this has to do with the emotion and the passions. Rudra, who is the god here, he's now gone from a youth to an old man, is a destroyer. The affects are destroying. You are possessed by your affects and ruined, of course. That's what it's about. So now the issue is to tame those emotions, not just your instincts of desire, but those affects because they're activated. And you do the unconscious work, you have more anger than ever, or more. It's all activated more. So the issue is taming those, like you would tame the ox. And this is at the belly, solar plexus level, where there is action and reaction, no reflection. And of course, the element here is fire with the passions. The Manipura chakra. See, this is a power center. If you think of it in terms of... Jung has talked about each of these chakras as also a particular kind of psychology, or a world unto itself with its own kinds of consciousness. People can be essentially... Jung said that the Greeks had their center in the diaphragm. That was the center of their consciousness, or people talk, where is the center of your consciousness in any of these places? And he also said, all right, did I say it? I don't know if he did or I did, I can't tell anymore. It's as if the second chakra is a Freudian chakra, where all the passions, the desires are begun. The crocodile, the devouring, you're dealing with all that darkness. And the third chakra is an Adlerian chakra, because you're dealing with the problem of power. Okay? And the fourth chakra, which is Anahata, which is the heart, that's the self. So that's where you get to Jungian psychology. So you have 3 different psychologies. Okay? But right now we're with the Manipura, which is the passions. It's called Manipura because heat at this level produces a lustrous gem called Mani. See, this in alchemy, this too, is the heat of the passions produces the self, or in what we talked about Islam, the pearl. That the pearl is there and is produced through the fire. Okay. And 3 is... Okay, here are the conditions of the load. We talked about the ram, which is a symbol of battle, And Shiva is take the form of Rudra, an old man now, seated upon a bull. We're back to the bull. Yeah, there's a chant that goes with this, a chant. A seed mantra, seated on a ram, carrier of Agni, Lord of Fire. And they have a certain chant that goes with that, which I don't know. But Shiva here is called Red Rudra, who is smeared with white ashes, while his Shakti, the goddess, is Lakini, who is fond of animal food. This is a digestive center. Avalon tells us in which the sadhaka, the seeker, is expected to satisfy the appetites of his devata Lakini. See, you're now expected to not just control your desires and lusts, you're supposed to fulfill them. We are still in the region of desire and continue to eat red meat, something given up in the higher chakras. Now Barry has got there. Barry doesn't eat meat anymore. Right? In many of the paths, you do give up meat at a certain level. This recalls to mind the tradition of the young males who are in training. They are often assigned a consort, a young girl to go with them. And in their training, they spend the first 6 months serving this girl, doing whatever she requires. The second 6 months, they're in bed with her, but no sex. Okay, there are not too many fathers here, but there's some sons of, and that's a hard thing to do, spending 6 months in bed with an attractive woman but not doing anything. It's an achievement. But the final 6 months, they're at it. And that's one of the things that these young seekers after the truth go through. Now, we have to look at the Shakti. Because here we're heavy into destruction, the effective power. She is somewhat less fearsome now, but her power, the energy of the universe, is still awesome. Purnananda tells us that Lakini is the benefactress of all, exalted with the drinking of ambrosia. But in her right hand she holds a thunderbolt, and the left she makes gestures of dispelling fear and granting boons. That's what I mentioned before. So you're dealing with this utter opposites. The thunderbolt to strike you dead, and the granting of boons. She is fond of meat. That's why you get to eat meat. Her breast is ruddy with the blood and fat that drop from her mouth. You want to kiss, baby? Do I look like her? Okay, this is not a pretty picture, but presents a potent one. The opposites, dispelling fear, while she also scares us to death, comes into play. Clearly, this chakra is a representation of the power principle, as I mentioned before. It's like the Adlerian psychology. Okay. So here is where you sometimes fulfill desires and sometimes continue to restrain them. And that's somehow to be solved individually. Any question about that? You want to tell me which desires you want to fulfill? No? Okay. Then we move up. This is where Jung says you finally move to where the self is. Anahata, which means the unattackable. And it's located in the heart. And here there are 12 petals. It's 4 times 3. It's really much more differentiated. The mandala here is a hexagram. And the animal is an antelope or gazelle. The principle, their tattva, is movement, touch, feel, and penis. And we'll talk about Shiva Shakti. And the element is air. You see, we go on earth, water, fire, and air. The psychological significance of this chakra is you come to a conscious union of the opposites. The Atman, the self, appears. And the Atman is a small flame that is in the castle. It's like the heart in the lungs. See, the lungs have to do with the air, and the heart has to do with the blood and the fire. And it's that kind of being with the beating of the heart that you are in connection with the self. Here is reflection, discrimination, judgment. In contrast to the previous chakra where there's struggle with the passions, you're possessed by the passions. Here it's as if you've overcome that. And Jung says that only here do you really arrive at the self. And you do that by coming to the impersonal aspect of oneself. That's not so easy, is it? We're always thinking of I, me, what that is. And to see I, me, as. You see from that place, you're looking down at the mountain at you. That's not so easy. Okay, discrimination and judgment. Jung also remarks he feels that that the collective consciousness has arrived at this chakra. I don't know if you would agree with that. I don't really. He felt, but also we confuse ourselves. We think we've arrived at this chakra, but we're really at the first chakra looking up. And I think that's probably more accurate. But I think in actuality, we're probably, all of us are in all the chakras. All of them, parts of us are there. That's why we live in this chaos. On the one hand, you're enlightened, on the other hand, you haven't been born yet. So it's as if the reconciliation of all those chakras and being together is a great effort. Hence that slow, meditation and moving the energy up. By the way, this is very literal, moving the energy up. I won't do Hindu meditation, but I'll show you how that works when we come to Kabbalah. That has something similar, except it's the reverse. It goes from the top down, opposite. But it's really that kind of process. No, we passed the fire chakra. We're in air. Okay. 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 Now, let's talk about the. You can see in the lotus what the gazelle antelope looks like. Okay, this lotus is called the charming lotus. It has as red as the banduka flower. The mandala is a Star of David, as you can see, uniting male and female triangles. And it's the smoke. There's a smoky quality that comes from the fires from below that move up. And the flame that's here that burns like this gentle flame. The wars are overcome. That's why Anahata is unattackable. The sound that is heard here is Kali Charana, a commentator, is that which issues without the striking of any two things together. We're familiar with that, with the sound of one hand clapping. And that means exactly, it's a sound which is no sound. We'll talk about sound in the next chakra or so. Here we know about the element is air. Now, the goddess here has 3 eyes. She is far-seeing and clad delicately in silken raiment. What a difference, huh? And the male, the Shiva Ishi, wears gems on his neck and bells on his toes, possessing the soft radiance of 10 million moons. The Shakti Kakini here becomes exhilarated and auspicious, benefactress of all. Okay, so her whole positive side is now shown much more clearly. Despite the fact that she still carries a noose and skull, she makes the sign of the blessing and the sign that dispels fear. Her heart, as we have seen, is softened with the drinking of nectar. See, the nectar comes from above and softens her heart. That ambrosial fluid coming from above. And she wears the skin of the black antelope. Does that not suggest she too is civilized? If you wear a skin of the black antelope, that's like what you wear every day, right? I mean, you only wear special times. So it's as if the goddess too has been transformed. Finally, we are told that the yogi who attains here not only has his senses completely under control, but also can concentrate intensely and is able to enter another's body. Now, what does that mean? Kali Charana means you can enter the enemy's fort or citadel even though guarded. We can understand this psychologically to mean that such a person is highly sensitive, can intuitively penetrate people's defenses, and can also, best of all, protect him from their darkness. He can render himself invisible at this level. Yet, we cannot discount the statement that such a person can fly across the sky. Now, are you familiar with this concept of the siddhis? S-I-D-D-H-I-S. These are the powers that some of the gurus have at this level. And they mean that literally. They can fly across the sky. Is this astral travel? Out of the body experience? Okay, only we conclude is the yogin at this point goes out of the ordinary situation of the first 3 chakras. And Okay, what was started at the beginning is now achieved at Anahata. See, this is the equivalent of the ox herding picture, whereas the man is riding on the ox. So you have now achieved the self, and the lower elements are combined with the upper elements, and you have peace. And here is the self is located in the heart region. To think with the heart, as the Pueblo Indians also know, is to truly have consciousness. This is no mere mental activity. Okay, any thought or question? We can move on then to the next chakra. Can we have the diagram again? This is chakra is called Vishuddha, which means purification, and it's located in the throat, the pharyngeal plexus. And here we have the ultimate in number of petals of the chakra, which is 16. So it's the most differentiated place while you're still, in a sense, limited. And the mandala is a circle. So we come to that. You remember, like the equivalent in the ox herding pictures. After number 5 and 6, then comes the circle, the empty circle. And this has the mandala of the circle. Now, most interesting here, the animal is a white elephant. That's amazing, isn't it? It's as if you see the initial element of nature, of ordinary life, gets utterly transformed, all this, and you come to the white elephant, which is an utterly transformed instinctive nature. Now the tattva, the sense act, is called akasha, which is space-giving, and refers to the hearing and the mouth. And the element here is ether, an element which is no element, right? Okay. I'll talk about the god and goddesses in a moment. The psychological significance is a pure concept. It's what Jung would call the reality of the psyche. The world is an inner drama that has to do with the inner idea that word and speech are beyond tangible reality. You can compare John, in the book of John, beginning is the word. See, in these religions, the word is both substantial and non-substantial. It's like the subtle body. And that's where your reality then leads to this psychic reality. Everything, you see, the idea, our culture has a very great difficulty in idea that there is a psychic reality. The only reality we can really accept is matter. It's rather peculiar to say that, for example, not realizing that you have an idea about building a building before you build the damn building, don't you? You know, we talked about the Kaaba. The Kaaba existed in heaven first before it got manifested. But that seems to be difficult for our culture. And this, of course, what Jung was talking about, psychic reality. Okay, he says here, okay, yeah, I've said that. Now, Akasha, are you familiar with that word? You are. You people, yeah, you know these things. Okay. Should we go home now? There is this tradition of the Akashic records in Hinduism, which means there is a place somewhere north of the web where all the records of all your incarnations, and if you get to this level, you go there and you can see them and relate to them and even see the implications of the incarnations that are to come. So this is psychic reality. Is that you go beyond matter, beyond life, and to go all to these other incarnations. You like that? How many have been to the Akashic substation? Nobody claims it. You're right not to claim it because somebody will attack you, or else ask your advice. Okay, now let's. Can we go to the Shiva and Shakti? Okay, I mentioned about the white elephant. As in Platonic philosophy, reason is meant to be a servant of the passions. There is an appreciation of the subjectivity of the mind. You know, people don't realize that. For Plato and Socrates, reason was not the highest. Reason was at the highest if it served the passions. Okay? Which is the same as the union of the ox herder and the ox. The reason is meant to be, he goes farther, a slave of the passions. And this is what this is about. The psychic realm, all the instincts are being served at the spiritual level. And this comes to the level where you can appreciate the subjectivity of mind, not just as intellect. The latter requires physical evidence for its conceptions, while the psyche itself does not require physical evidence. Consider, for example, the image of God. Okay. Now, in the next chakra, we'll see it's the absence of animal altogether. There is only psychic reality. Here, though, we are in the realm of pure concepts, and the world itself is an inner drama. Okay. And this is consonant with this idea the word and speech are beyond physical reality. Okay. Now, the images of the god and goddess at this chakra. The male principle has grown significantly in power and presence, and that the female principle, already softened in anahata, has become like light itself, white. The god, Sadashiva, is seated on a great lion seat, holds a trident, a battle axe, a sword, a thunderbolt, a great snake, a bell, a goad, a noose, and makes mudras, hand gestures dispelling fear. In short, he contains all the powers of the previous chakras, but is now in a condition of purification, in which all is subjective. All is subjective. Everything that was before, all those powers are all purely in the mind, or in the psyche. The mind is the only reality. Indeed, he is now united with the female principle. And at this level, they become together as an androgyne, as an alchemy. And this androgyne is known as the ever beneficent one. Similarly, the goddess, here is the Shakti Shakini. She is white, carries a bow, arrow, noose, and goad. No longer frightening, she still conveys the power, like her consort, to urge the seeker onward to continue in meditation and attain this higher level of consciousness. Okay. Okay, the sadhaka at this stage will become free of the bonds of illusion and open the gate of liberation, which is called moksha, as the next step. And the next step is ajna, the third eye. Ajna is called the place of command between the eyes. Now you see there's a reduction of the petals. You see things have gotten simplified. We're back down to just two. Just two. The mandala, what is the mandala? No mandala. Beyond the mandala. It's beyond picture 8. We're back to over to 9, the equivalent of the other. Animal, no animal. The tattva is manas, mental faculties, but not just thinking. It has to do with beyond thinking. And we have here the Shiva and Shakti, Shambhu, Haik, and an element, none. Now, what is the psychological significance? This is the place of command. No animal means psychic reality does not require animal or bodily reality. The yogin is a psychic content of God. Can you grasp that? Now, this is, I think, the Jung of 1932 who wrote this, and I'll mention something that he wrote about Sahasrara, was very different from the Jung for many years later, who had a dream in which he met himself as a guru. You know that one? And he awakened thinking, am I myself dreaming of a guru? Or am I a guru dreaming of me? And who am I? So that's the place. This is the place. And the truth is, at this point, you realize that you're a psychic content of God. Before you knew there was only the psychic reality. Okay. So you have psychic reality. Now you know you're only a content of God. That changes the inflation, doesn't it? Okay. That the yogi is a psychic content of God. Hence there's no animal, no instinctive level, no element, no mandala, nothing. You're just a psychic. Okay, now, can we do the picture again? Sorry. So this is the unio mystica. In Western mysticism, this is the same as the unio mystica. And here the lingam has become white. Everything is white. You see how it's all changed around, and you can see the mantra in the middle is Om, as you remember from your Sanskrit studies. Okay. Om now is the ultimate, and fire and sun and moon converge. The self-atma shines lustrously like a flame, and the yogin gains the final siddhis, the final powers, that permit him at his death to voluntarily put his prana at this spot and enter Purusha directly. You know, you die and you don't need to reincarnate anymore. Do you know Richard Gere? So I'm interviewed some time ago. You know, he's a very active Buddhist and very much involved with Tibetan Buddhism. And he was saying exactly this is what he was wanting to get out, wanting to leave. This is the place. You leave from here. He wants to leave the wheel of samsara, of continuing incarnations. Now this guy has everything and he wants to go, so how do you think you feel? Okay, now the goddess at this chakra is the Shakti Hakini, with 6 faces, moons, and 6 arms, in one of which she holds a book. We finally got her to read. Okay. The other arms are lifted up in gestures of dispelling fear, granting boons, holding a skull, a small drum, and a rosary. Her mind is pure. The holding of a book is interpreted as a gesture conveying learning or knowledge. So knowledge now comes via the feminine principle. It moves around. The yogin is now connected with wisdom as well as purity. The Shiva, the male principle, is now in phallic form, but he shines like a chain of lightning flashes, which is a further purification of the phallic energy. This is where the subtle body occurs. I know the subtle body. It doesn't mean that I live there. It just occurs. Here the sadhaka realized that his Atma is nothing but a meditation on this lotus. That the self itself is only a meditation on this lotus. It's like I said before, that the yogin is a psychic content of God, of the self. And I mentioned here Jung's late dream. The ego is a content of the self. Okay? Any thought before we go to the last one? Okay, this is the last one. The Sahasrara. And this occurs above the crown on the head. It's not even in the body. It's above the body. Just above. And it has, you see, up till now it's been increasing, then coming back to 2, and now it's 1,000. Because it's the 1,000 leaves of the lotus. The 1,000 is the multiplicity. So people keep saying, you know, that Hinduism is a polytheism. No, it's both. The one occurs in the context of the many, and the many and the one become as a whole here, like the 1,000 lotus, the leaves of the lotus. And the lotus is, you know, the East, it's a wonderful image. You've all seen lotuses, of course. Very beautiful flower. But then they float on a pond. But you know what they float on? And the stuff that goes with it. You know, it's mud and junk and all that. So they arise there. So it's a wonderful image of this union of these opposites. Okay. Okay, I have to read about this. There's no animal, no tattva, no principle, no Shiva, no Shakti, no nothing. So we are at the void. The psychological significance of this chakra is shunyata, the void. All being is no longer being. It's the utter ultimate union of opposites. It's called the Advaita, non-two, or Nirdvandava, free of objects, free of opposites, objectless subject, the total union of Shiva and Shakti. So this is the ultimate. Now, this is what Jung said in 1932 about this chakra when he wrote his paper on that. To speak about the lotus of the 1,000 petals, the Sahasrara center, is quite superfluous, because that is merely a philosophical concept with no substance whatever for us. It is beyond any possible experience. In ajna, there is still the experience of the self that is apparently different from the object, the God. But in Sahasrara, it is not different. So the next conclusion would be that there is no object, no God. There is nothing but Brahman. There is no experience because it is one. It is without a second. It is dormant. It is not. And therefore it is nirvana. This is an entirely philosophical concept, a mere logical conclusion from the premises above. It is without practical value for us. And this is Jungian 32, where he's now 57. You know, somebody told me before she was 51 and feeling quite elderly. This Jung at 57 was not even halfway there. And he'd already been through the Red Book and all that stuff, and already had been through alchemy, but he was still at this spot. As I say, the Jung that I knew in the late 50s was further along. He was firmly saying that you need a consciousness, you need an ego. But his dream, in a sense, what I told you, and the dream harkens back to, is it Lao Tzu, or I forgot, some Taoist who dreamt of a butterfly. Chang Tzu, not Lao Tzu, yeah. And he didn't know whether he was the butterfly dreaming of Chang Tzu or he was Chang Tzu dreaming of a butterfly. And that goes back several thousand years, so yeah, these ideas are around a long time. I just saw the stuff at these cave paintings in Spain, northern Spain. And thank goodness I visited there and while we were living in Europe and saw those. They're now being located around 40,000 years ago and may have been done by a Neanderthal man who couldn't even spell. Shame on you. These things are extraordinary. I mean, that they, you know, because the psyche is the psyche. Of course, it changes, of course, from Neanderthal to Homo sapiens, but those, you know, you look at the apes sometimes, there's your brother. Okay. The Sahasrara constitutes a mandala, but it's very different. It's both a symbol and concreteness. It is no longer located inside the body, but floats on top. I didn't talk about the letters, but here all the letters are gathered together here. And there is a supreme bliss and void, supreme light and formlessness. The bliss is a consequence of Atma realized. Being, consciousness, bliss. Are you familiar with that Hindu expression? Chit, Sat, Ananda. Do you know that? It's what the Chit is the consciousness and Sat is being, or the other way around, and bliss. And that what happens here. Bliss pours down to the lower chakras. The filaments of the lotus are multitudinous conditions, names and qualities upon which much is written. Because what is noted here in the book is at the end of it's very, very funny. At the end of the Avalon's book, there's a picture of the yogin. Do you know this book, the Avalon? Any of you? He's a very gaunt, you know, dark fellow, very gaunt, skinny guy, doing all these things, and he is so gaunt. He hardly exists, and yet he exists. And apparently he has this bliss. And it's an extraordinary figure, that this is the one who undergoes all this stuff and does all those things. So, I don't know, what do you think about that? I read to you what Jung had to say. I can tell you further that in that part of the book, there are innumerable regulations or suggestions of how to proceed. And to me, it's like alchemy. Alchemy, all these places, you do this and pour that, 15 meters, all of that. Tremendous amount of stuff. Practical things in a totally unpractical manner. And I think of it as like an alchemy. They were doing all this because they weren't quite sure. You know, here it is, you have the ultimate in spirituality, and how do you square that with being, with matter? And this is what this stuff is about, all the kinds of ways of arriving at that ultimate bliss. And you know, is the picture there? Yeah. He looks in better shape than the one in Avalon's book. But now, the Sadhaka is now increasingly separate and private upon approaching his or her goal, free from bondage. But you see, there, in this system, there's nothing about a last picture where you come back to humankind. And I get reminded of, there was a wonderful movie about a very good actress, I think an English actress in India, who was in a convent. and in India, and was being seduced away somehow. And there was, she was in chaos and confused. And there was a guru sitting on a pillar, totally lost it. And she needed direction. And she went to ask this guy for direction. What do you think he did? Nothing. No, he didn't say, "No, lady, go that way." No. This is a Hollywood movie, but it wasn't a Hollywood guru. He was gone. And this is no slumdog billionaire either. He's gone. Really gone. Just hanging around until this decays or something happens. And that's that Indian path ultimately, is to not come back, okay? There is a tradition of compassion, as there is in Buddhism, but the highest form is to leave. Maybe you could leave when you're supposed to, but, like Richard Gere, get out of all the incarnations and just leave. And on that note, we're not going to... that's the end of the Hindu path. Now, if you think about comparisons, there's the difference you see with the Buddhist one of coming back into life. And you'll see the opposite as we're going to do now. We'll do the Kabbalah, where the whole point is to bring the divine into manifestation. But they're all occupied with the same divine and the same nothingness and the void. And here you end with the void. In Judaism, you start with the void. But it's the same void. You can't avoid it. Thank you. My wife, she squirms at my puns. or I get grades. But that's what it's about. As you remember, there's the vision of the chariot in the Hebrew Bible. And that began, which is called Merkaba mysticism. Merkaba meaning chariot. So it goes back that far. So there is this underlying, before that, Judaism is essentially a whole. It's like, all is one, as you can imagine, that. And but from then on, there are these two branches. One branch, especially after the emergence of Christianity, one side is the formal side, and the other is the mystical side. And the mystical side, of course, is the one I got attracted to. And I think, should I tell you how I got there? Yeah. Okay, I think I mentioned it Friday night, because I was honoring my grandfather, who was a Hasid and a follower of a famous Rebbe. So, hello, who gave me the blessing for my family, and as Jung gave me a blessing to be a Jungian analyst. And without that, I couldn't do anything. Sorry. Anyhow, when I started analysis in 1950, after I did my first active imagination within 3 months. And I had this thing, it was a conversation with a feminine figure and a painting I did. And I went to the analyst session. It was Dr. Zeller on La Cienega Boulevard, and he was upstairs. And some people are nodding. I think if you saw him, you're a fellow Nalisan with me. And there were some books that had just arrived, apparently. The package had been opened, and it was the Zohar. And I knew vaguely what that was, but I had no idea really. And I picked up a volume at random and opened it up and started to read. And the fantasy was very much like the fantasy I had in my hand, my first active imagination, and it scared the hell out of me, as you can imagine. So I went upstairs, and was trembling in deal with that. Well, I was 25 years old, and I didn't touch that again for 15 years until I was 40. And I went everywhere else. I could handle all the other places, but I couldn't do that. And then I found out, at the age of 40, when I began, I looked into it again, that was right. You're not supposed to go into Kabbalah until you're 40. So I did the right thing. Because the story is of those who enter into the mysticism, the initial one back in the beginning of this era, the story is there were of four. The first guy who went into it went mad. The second guy died. The third guy lost his faith. And the fourth to enter in and come through all right was Rabbi Akiba. So if you go into this, you have a 25% chance So it's wise to be sort of prepared. Okay, but before we start, of course, the central symbol of that, I guess I should say more about the history. So there was the Merkaba mysticism, and then the true Kabbalistic mysticism began with, presumably in the early centuries of our current era, but came into fruition in Spain in the 9th and the 12th, 13th century with Moses de Leon, who wrote all this down, and he said, in effect, he was really copying it from somebody who lived in the early centuries, and it's never known was it done then or done before or not. But at the same time, the same movement was going on in Spain and in southern France and Provence. But at the same time, this is one of those periods, where all this creativity was going on. You had mysticism in the French psyche as well. So all these places was going. But then again, it sort of died out, or was not commonly. They go into the underground and they come back out again. And then it appeared again in 18th century, in 16th century Palestine with Rabbi Isaac Luria, who really advanced it a lot, the Kabbalah, when he was in Sfat in Israel. And then again in 18th century Eastern Europe, the Baal Shem Tov, you may have heard that name, a very powerful, he really brought that mysticism to the masses, where before it had always been a more or less elite thing, but for him it was really in the masses. And then, of course, the Enlightenment happened to everybody in the 19th century, and the Jewish Enlightenment was the same, but all this was superstition and so on, and all went again underground and vanished until the midpoint of the 20th century, where it came back up, and has been the last part of the 20th century has been very much involved in the United States and in Israel. So it's been enlivened again. So these mystical movements, and if you want to write a book about those things, apparently there's an audience for that. And it worked. And as I say, the central image in Jewish mysticism, in the Kabbalic mysticism, is the tree of life. You remember in the tree of life, after Adam, it always goes back to our first parents who got it wrong but didn't get it wrong, because it was, in the fortunate fall, is that when they were, the angels told God that lest Adam and Eve, you see there were these two trees, the tree of life and the tree of good and evil. Adam and Eve ate the fruit of the tree of good and evil, not of life. And they were enjoined not to eat the tree of good and evil. Nothing was said about the tree of life. If they'd mind their business, they could have had the tree of life, and we wouldn't have had all this trouble. But being as they were, Jewish and all, they weren't really Jewish. They were everybody. They were rebellious, but the implication was the tree of life is the mystical path. It's like so it touches me. It touches me because it's the same thing as in Islam. God is your friend. You can follow God and be with the tree of life without having to be a bloody rebel. But you have to be a bloody. That's the deal. Anyhow, but in the story, it's as if the angels say to God, lest they eat from the tree of life and become as one of us. So a flame was put between human beings and the tree of life. It's a powerful image. But what is not said, and what I'm bringing to you, is to realize there was no enjoinder if they had not eaten of the tree of good and evil. In other words, if they had not taken that kind of consciousness, which led to the opposites, they could have eaten of the tree of immortality. You see, that's what they meant. Unless they eat of the tree of life, which is immortality, and become as one of us. But obviously we can't do that. We have to go a long way around. But that's it. So that's the path toward immortality, toward union with God, to the unio mystica. So we have to have a little, before we go into the tree, we have to go do a little theology as well, as we did before. Here now is in Judaism, God is God, beyond any comparison. In Kabbalah, this transcendent God is called Ayin. a Hebrew word that translates into no thing. Zero. Sound familiar? In this conception, God is beyond existence, movement, or stillness, is neither above nor below, and is represented by a circle or a zero. This utter transcendence is followed in sequence by the second name of God, Ein Sof, which means without end. This is the title of God Who, with a capital W. That is the totality of everything. The totality of that which is everywhere. What is and what is not. This image is that of the immanent God. We have the zero is the utterly transcendent. This one is the totally immanent, totally present. And that's the one. You have the zero and the one. Remember I mentioned before about 10 combining the zero, utterly transcendent, and the one, which is the monotheism, which is utterly immanent. And those things together make this totality. Okay. But even the immanent God is still without attributes, because the latter can manifest only within existence, and existence is finite. Okay. And who implies agency or possible agency. Now, the oral tradition tells us that the reason for existence, as I mentioned before, is God wished to behold God. This is very much in line with what Jung discovered psychologically about the self when he was examining the depths of the psyche, is the self wants a connection with the ego as much as the ego wants a connection with the self. And these are wonderful expressions. In Sufism, for example, is that your search, your hunger for God is God's hunger for you. Which is good to know, you see, when you're yearning for that experience, that same yearning is God in you, yearning for you. So it's not like some song, my beloved is not there. The beloved is there. Okay. But the image of God, the self, had everything except a partner with whom to dialogue. Hence you see in the Jewish tradition, it's always a dialogue with God. Okay, it's somebody to engage. In order to develop consciousness, and this is long before Jung, in order to be conscious, God had everything except, can you be conscious without having a partner? And here is Islam said the same thing. You think you can develop yourself without God? You fool. This is the same. God, but the other side is not, you were this way, God's this way, he needs a partner. Hence the creation of the tiny but evolving self-consciousness of humans, who could bring such consciousness back to God. Okay. See, God apparently doesn't know his impact. Everybody died. How come? Do you see that it's so that power doesn't know the impact on us poor mortals, right? So that consciousness is needed. Okay, and this process is needed. Ultimately, human beings becoming co-creator status with God. This is the meaning of man being created in God's image. Finally, you understand what that means. Big. Being created in God's image means you are created as a partner for God, for dialogue with God. That's pretty big. Now, before the creation of ego consciousness, Adam and Eve, says Kabbalah, face did not gaze upon face. This is another pungent phrase expressing the same loneliness of consciousness in the divine being. God longs for man, is even in search of man. You see, in Sufi is the hunger for man. And Judaism is in search of man. That God, if you're searching God, God is searching for you. There's a book by a wonderful conservative theologian, Heschel. Do you know that name? A very, very wonderful book about prophets called In God in Search of Man. Okay. Now, this is how it happened. In an act of total free will, God withdrew the absolute all, Ein Sof, that's the one, from one place in order to allow a void to appear. See if this matches the physics. This made it possible for a mirror of existence. Face gazing upon face. That's the mirror. My name is Spiegelman, means mirror. My ancestors were lens grinders with Spinoza in Spain, according to my grandfather. Of course, who came before that from Spain. Before that, you know where. Okay, made it possible for a mirror of existence, face gazing upon face, to manifest in an infinitesimal point. Okay. This act of contraction, which we know from Hinduism, this act of contraction is the initial condition in Hinduism, was called Tsimtsum, where the divine being contracts into a point. From this infinitesimal point, creation ultimately began. An image that is remarkably similar to present-day physics, in which the universe is conceived of as having taken place via the Big Bang. We also now notice the God's longing for self-awareness that's in the background of creation, with face wanting to gaze upon face. And Jung goes into this too, of course, in answer to Job. So that's why we're here. Okay. The initial divine creation, which preceded biblical creation, entailed an emanation of a beam of light from the endless light, the Ein Sof Or, it's called. Remember, the Ein Sof was the one. Ein Sof Or is this beam of light, which surrounded the void, penetrating from the outside. Remember, we talked about the light before, the beam, penetrating toward the center. This beam, Kav as it's called, was the divine will manifesting itself in 10 stages of emanation. These stages are called Sephirot. And you'll see when we come to the tree, these are the 10 aspects, manifestations of God. And it was manifested in these 10. And they're called Sephirot, Sephira singularly. That word doesn't exist in any other language, but is similar to the root cipher, which means zero, or sapphire, which means zero or the jewel. From alchemy, you know this. So these Sephirot, these 10, constitute the tree of life. And each Sephira is a vessel of divine power, manifesting attributes of God, all held in complex relationship from the beginning of creation until God wills them to vanish into the void again. Now the relationships among those 10 Sephirot are ordered by 3 principles, are called the hidden splendors. That's Zazazot, it's like Zohar, which are conceived as we gaze upon it as a tree. And it's so interesting because this is like Hinduism. The left pillar is feminine, with its Sephirot manifestations of God. The right pillar is masculine. And remember Ida and Pingala? And the central pillar, which is Sushumna in Hinduism, okay, is a mediating principle. And that's, it's jointly gendered. It's male and female union, androgyne, the middle pillar. It's a parallel. And by the way, the meditation is similar. And there was no connection, as far as I know. These things are developed. I mean, God said hello to Adam, and he said hello to somebody in India, and they did it. Okay. Now, that these opposites are in the middle pillar. They're balanced. Each Sephira has its own names and meanings. Like I think we can, you can use the. This is a simpler version of the tree. Is it up there? Yeah, you can see those are all the Sephirot. You can see there. On the left side is the feminine, the right side the masculine, the middle are the unions. Okay. Like mercy and love are opposite on one side, and will is on the other. Okay, all the Sephirot manifest under the influence of these 3 pillars, and they go as opposites. Here, you can see them here. They go as a lightning flash, and this is how it's different. They begin in heaven. The Kabbalistic tree has its roots in heaven, unlike all other trees, and then comes into manifestation. And we'll see later on where the roots are in heaven, and the trunk and the branches and so on. And the energy comes from the top down, like a lightning flash, and there you see them there, and I'll tell you about those for the Sephirot. And we, in our path, as we're doing the work on it, we go from the bottom up. So the angels, and you know the angels, Jacob's angels going up and down. You remember that? That's the symbol of of this work. The human being works its way up, and the angels come down, and that there is that interplay of this flow. Okay, so I really wanted to do a meditation with you. Do you all have the book?
Yeah.
Okay, why don't you choose? I can lecture some more, or I can lead you in a meditation, a Kabbalistic meditation that I've been doing for 50 years, and you can read. Everything I have to tell you is here, really. Let's do the meditation. Okay. I had no idea. All right. So you saw those, the Sephirot and their layers. Now, this is the figure Adam Kadmon, which is like the primordial Adam before Adam, and he is there, and he is carrying these Sephirot. As you can see them all, they're there. Okay. Now, what we're going to do. So please close your eyes. And what we're doing now is I'm going to be chanting names of God that belong to each of these, the middle pillars. Is that bad? No. And that have to do with each of these centers that reconcile these opposites. And then, and you can see what they're doing is bring together these opposites. And I'll chant the name, tell you what it means, and then we can chant it together. Okay. So I want you to imagine first a golden light touching the crown of your head. This is called Keter, where you start. And the name of God we're going to chant there is Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, which means God is being. I am. God is I am. I'll chant it first in Hebrew, and then you can follow me. Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. One more time. Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. Yes, you're to imagine that golden light circulating. Now we bring the light down, going around the neck, this golden light. And this is God as the divine, as the creator like the word, as we saw in the Hinduism. And in that, there is the figure called Da'at, which is the Holy Spirit, which is not a sephira, but floats through. It's like the Holy Spirit. Because you'll hear that when I chant the name. Yehovah Elo Avedath. Yehovah Elo Avedath. Yehovah Elo Avedath. So you have there the Yehovah, you know that from the Tetragrammaton, which has to do with God's mercy. Eloah is the singular for Elohim, which is a plural noun for creation, as God is creator. God is called mostly in Genesis to begin with as Elohim, as the creator God. And when he tells the Jewish people what they're supposed to do, then he's Yehovah. And Veda'ath is through the knowledge, through the presentation of the knowledge of God. This way, Yehovah Elohah Veda'ath. Okay, now then, please bring the light down to the chest, to the heart region, again, which is at the center. And this is the center, really, of Kabbalah. And this is, we would say, this is for us, is where the self occurs. And it's called Tifereth, which is has beauty among its many names. And the name here is Yehovah Elohim, which combines both God's mercy and God's justice. Yehovah Elohim, Yehovah Elohim, you bring the light down to the genital region, circulating around the genital region, and here the chant is Shaddai El Chai, the Lord of life, the vitality of existence. Shaddai El Chai, Shaddai El Chai, Shaddai El Chai. One more. Shaddai El Chai. Excuse me. We bring the light down, and it passes the ego region, which is near the genitals, down to the feet, and circulated around there. And there, the chant is Adonai Haaretz, God, Lord of the earth. Adonai Haaretz, Adonai Haaretz. Thank you for caring for me. Okay, now our task is to circulate that light, and you begin by starting with the head, the top, and you imagine bringing the light down the left side of your body to your feet, and bringing back up the right side, and circulating it around. Okay, please do that. And have that coordinated with your breathing. As you exhale, bring the light down, and as you inhale, bring the light back up. Now bring the light back up to the top of the head, and you go to the front part of the body, down, and back up through the back. Exhalation down, inhalation up. Now bring the energy of the light to your feet. And the last phase is called the fountain, in which you raise it up. First, the inhalation, raise the light up to your genital region. And exhale. Then bring it up to the heart. And then to the throat. Then to the top of the head. Then you bring it all the way up and have it flow out as a fountain off the top of your head down to your feet. And bring it all the way back up to as a fountain. Then to imagine yourself in the center of all that light as it's around you. And bring all that light to your heart. And have it move out into the world with love. Amen. Okay. You can come back now. Sorry, it was rather, of course it's broken up a bit. And I didn't tell you, but I have to tell you something about importance, about the problem of evil, since we have 2 minutes. In Kabbalah, the evil has several sources. One is it's the result of earlier creations of God that didn't turn out okay. And this is the residue of chaos and corruption that tests existence always. So it's there as a test, like Satan is a test. Also, in the tree of life, the evil is a result of the imbalance of the Sephirot. You have mercy on one side, mercy and love, and justice and power on the other. By the way, the power is feminine, as you all well realize. And if they are in disharmony, that's a source of evil. If there's too much power or strength, that's a source of evil. But also too much mercy is a source of evil. That's an interesting idea. And their idea is they're balanced in Tifereth, which is the center of beauty and love. So evil is through imbalance, essentially.
Marvin, I just want to thank you for an incredible day.
Well, thank you guys. You're a most appreciative audience. Thank you a lot. Thank you.
And I want to say how grateful I am that it has been recorded.
Oh, really?
Because there is
Uh-oh,
so
that
much-
means I'm... Uh-oh.
Well, because
I
there's
forgot.
so much to take in and to retake in, to think about, and I'm sure all of us will really look forward to being able to see this and to listen to it, because there's such a wealth of material there.
Isn't it? Yeah.
It's amazing.
I'm glad. If you got that... These paths are so wonderful. And that's why I was so happy to do this book. And there are a number of other ones in there, too, that you realize that, these are the traces of the divine. And they give you a huge one-up into that material.
Yes.
Great material.
And you've really opened doors.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you
for
all.
being
Thank you.
here.
Any questions or comment? Please.
I have read, and I'm not sure whether it's lore or legend, but that contained within the Hajj is a meteorite, telluric metal.
I've heard that too. Yeah, there are lots of legends that, of course, all these. Just think about how many aspects of the cross that Christ was on. There must be about 55 tons of wood around the world which will come from that cross, and these are holy relics, and the legends, because the psyche embellishes and raises that. So I've heard the same thing. I have no idea whether that's true or not.
I mean, I mention it because in Iliade he talks in the Forge and the Crucible quite a bit about telluric metal and is basically the origin of alchemy, and there's a lot of alchemical allusions here.
Yeah, this is a good book. Eliad's a good guy.
I don't know him.
I don't know him either, but he was pretty good at Chicago. Any other comment or question?
Isn't it possible, it seems to me, to reconcile the entertainment and the ecstatic?
I hope we're doing it today.
Yeah, well, that was that's how I was thinking of it. That it's the story of the false dichotomy of the ego's identification, but if that's let go of,
That's the issue.
you can do both.
Hopefully. But you see, I think Islam understands that this annihilation of the annihilation. You see, there's the secret subtlety. Look, no hands. That you get identified with the achievement or with the enlightenment, and you kill it. So you have to keep that vulnerability. So, I come close to tears, and I don't mind. I hope you don't mind, because that keeps the vulnerability. I don't intend it, of course. You can't do those things, but that's. Yes, I agree. And anything else? Okay, yes.
Once an imam told me that Sufism is not part of Islam. Can you comment on that, please?
Well, they try to get out of that, rightly, naturally, because who wants to be part of a period in history where it's very violent and judgmental and horrible? And but they are. All of it has to do. It's Arabic and the Quran, all that. The people have transcended. But and Sufism, of course, is all these religions. If you get to the mystical part, I'm okay with all of them. Except
the esoteric part.
The outer structure usually is more difficult because that's where things change a lot.
Thank you.
Yes.
This is a more theoretical question. In general, it seems to me that with so much religious strife in the world, it seems that the problem is less between any organized religion and either atheists or agnostics. It seems, and I'd like you to comment on this, that the real problem seems to be that within most of the major religions, Sufism being one example, have a more mystical element, which, you know, like Sufism or the Kabbalists or even mystical Christianity.
Oh, yes.
It seems that that's where the problem lies. It's actually within the religions.
Well, because they're meeting, all of them, you see, and this is where, you know, the psyche is the same everywhere, so it's going to produce the same stuff. I mean, in the book, there's a lot of comparison I do in the WABA book, and I'll do some today. But it meets different aspects of the soul. The mystical aspect is very much more the divine within. And you do that path, and it's like, you know, Jung's Red Book. You'll turn up the same sorts of stuff. And you will too. I mean, not exactly the same because you're a different person. But the outer structures are very valuable and important too. I mean, maybe many of you don't need that anymore, but it's important to have ritual and structure and all of that and all those things. So, yeah, there's division within each religion. But you see, all of them, you know, I know, for example, you're not allowed to do Kabbalah until you're 40. Yeah, and you have to have done, to know Torah, to do all that stuff. And Christianity as well, you have, you know, these guys, they didn't just run away and do it, you know. They did what the religion demanded. In other words, you need to be contained before you can get free. Otherwise, you're just running around like a kid.
How then would you say atheism serves the psyche?
It's wonderful. It's the cleanser. One of my favorite patients now is an atheist. He teaches religion in a school. Can you imagine teaching religion while you're an atheist? And he's struck. And it's like, you see, in Hinduism, it should take at least 12 incarnations to get enlightenment. Except if you're an atheist, it takes only 6. Because you're endlessly occupied with God, you son of a bitch, you don't even exist. You see, you're passionately involved. I mean, what does Jesus say? If you're lukewarm, then you can't get in. Yeah, and it's having that passion, the desire, you see. Mina. Without the passionate desire in the heart, you might as well, you know. That's a little too much, because there's a lot that goes on. You can do, you know, I mean, you can be holy. What was somebody said? A proper religious woman was celebrating the putting a stick of wood on a saint that was being burned, and she was being religious, you know, adding her stick to the saint that was being burned. And from her point, you know, she was a good Christian. Not so good for the guy on being burned. But, you know, this is the soul expressing itself in these multiple ways.
Just want to put it in here because it came up in your description about the kind of movement toward the ultimate realization of the nature of projection and the self that is projected. And what occurred to me was, yes, that is the work. And what happens to us when we maybe grab that ultimate realization prematurely if we haven't done the work, I think it leads to depression.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think that often happens. I think, what was it? Remember the old days, it talked about flight into health was the old Freudian idea. You know, people start analysis, and it's also, you know, you have a dream, and the guy says a smart thing about it, and I'm all better. So after the third session, I'm finished. You haven't even started. That's right.
Yeah,
that's
and
right.
it reminded me of something von Franz said about the danger of taking all this awareness that we've learned from our predecessors, Jung, and as well as these spiritual guides, and not doing our own work, grabbing hold of these realizations and thinking we've got something when we haven't got it.
Absolutely right, because the next picture is the grabbing hold, where you do the work goes on that way. Yes. Thank you. Any other?
I was wondering about the interference of the others, the environment.
Outside world, yes.
Yeah. Isn't that also related to the fact that always people want to tell you something, you do something that's better for you, don't just get away from what's really you. Isn't that part of it?
Yes.
It's very difficult to
Right.
get.
Why are you looking at your dreams, being narcissistic and self-centered? You're sick. When I was, a young graduate student, they had one of the tests was a Bernreiter personality test. and they had a score for introversion. Introversion is sick.
Yeah.
If you live in an extroverted culture, introversion is sick. So why are you doing that? I mean, this is masturbation that you're doing. Get out in the world and do something. And this is the extroverted world, and that's true. That's what they're saying. And ultimately, Jung agrees, or that it's a sin to move away from your collective. And you pay for that sin by bringing back something useful. If you don't bring back something useful, it is just self-centered and narcissistic. That's a hard one for people.
But he also wrote to Emma Jung after his first trip to America, the American are so extroverted as hell.
Yeah, well, yes, I know. I love my country and was born here, but I felt when I went there to study, I could finally breathe in Switzerland, because they're all introverted, and they don't bother you. Well, if you're a Swiss, we have a Swiss person, they bother you a lot. They bother you only if you break the rules. I mean, they're very much into the rule, keeping your floor clean and keep the rules. So, but if well, look at a contrast. We happened to have a car for a while, and I was driving and crossed into the train tracks, and of course, the policeman was shocked, really. But I was a foreigner, he let me go. But when we went to Spain, I speak Spanish, driving in some place in southern Spain, and I made a left turn against the rules, and the constable there happened to be there, and he looked at me and said, "Que fea," which means how ugly. How ugly. It's aesthetically unsatisfying. They have Velázquez, well, it's how ugly. I love that. These differences are very sweet. Yes?
Would you comment back on the catching the ox, the phrase, he constantly longs for the old, sweet, scented field. Would you comment on the collective manifestation of that in the economic crises that we see in the world today, in Europe and even in this country? This notion of the massive appeal to not being responsible and staying in what I would argue are infantile positions.
Right. I'm totally unqualified to speak about the world and its economic situation, and would appreciate any enlightenment that any of you have. But I think what I can comment on is what is being said here is that there's a longing to stay unconscious. And whether we do it personally for ourselves or in the world, and all the new things that happen are very threatening. Hence, and I think part of the reason we have such a, I would say, a regression to institutionalization of religion and toward, that I've got the truth and you don't, is because of the threat of these endless changes that shake us up terribly and can't stand it. And of course, in this peculiar, I think it's infantile too, to be able to, that you can spend all you want to and it's okay. And on the other hand, the banks aren't willing to give up much, are they? It's a curious idea that, anyway, let's not get into the politics. We'll get into additional issues that I more unqualified to deal with.
It's interesting to me, the last few words there where it says to use the whip freely. It called to mind the words Jesus uses when he says, "I come bearing a sword." And I was thinking that these two images, the whip and the sword, at this particular point in the series, suggest the advent of differentiation and discernment.
Of judgment. You see, you start out by being judgmental, and judgmental people usually have very poor judgment. Yeah, we do. We're so full of judgment because we are not judging adequately. Whereas the sword is to discriminate, not to go to all that, but to distinguish one from the other. And the whip is that discipline of having that adequate discipline. So, see, the thing is, the animal nature wants to be spontaneous. And what's wrong with that? And at the end, it is like that. As a matter of fact, you'll see the next picture. But you have to go through a kind of discipline because there's too much lust, too much greed, too much, undisciplined, laziness, all those sins that you don't even know you have until you until you have an ego. It's like you have to have an ego and then you have to get rid of it, or at least subsume it to something else. It's the paradox of the spiritual path. Okay.
You mentioned the matador, and although I've been to Spain, I didn't have the courage of the matador to go to a bullfight. But in any event, I've heard that, and I don't know if they any longer do this, but after the bull is killed, after the performance is over, the bull is butchered and the meat distributed to the masses.
That's correct.
And it almost takes this picture kind of one step further. I mean, to use the alchemical term, that's the multiplicatio, because then the body of the self actually
It's shared with the masses.
becomes mana and it's shared.
Well, it's like a Eucharist.
Yeah.
It's a holy meal in a sense, and if you feel it as a holy meal, see part of the thing too. If the drunk could realize, if you said a prayer before you drink or eat, you say grace, that's already a sanctification of these instinctual acts. Or if you understand, people eating the bull meat as a holy act, it changes its character. Also, if the bullfighter has done well, he gets a reward of the tail, or the ultimate reward. You know what that is? The cojones. Well, that's something.
Fertility.
Yeah. All right.
I have a question. I'm just wondering, now is the bull, is the ox black again, or is it white and we just can't tell in the picture?
That's a good point. I think I would guess, I don't know, your view is as good as mine, that it returns to its nature, its initial nature.
It's a Red Bull.
As long as you say a prayer before you drink it. Because that's its nature. It is dark. And it's dark in this positive way. The self is not a nice guy. This will offend some of you who see Jesus as, and that's true too, as kind and generous and turning the cheek and all that, but he also has a sword. And he shows his father's nature every so often. He blows up.
Hi, this is a question that takes maybe beyond the individual to a larger picture. And it's something I'm struggling with myself. And I think it relates to the concept of the necessity of structure and the necessity of the intuition. And I'm talking about the Vatican and the nuns. I'm trying to work with this as a former IHM myself, having gone through this in the 60s, seeing it now. I'm trying to pull back and see a large picture. And please help me with this. I'm looking at the Vatican right now as the guardian.
Just submit, that's all.
Yeah, right. That's the conversation. I'll tell you what to do. You do what I tell you to do. We're done. Yeah.
Right, can I interrupt you? Because in my old barber, an Italian barber, he is retired. He had a picture behind the chair. It has this sort of a big, heavy sort of Don with two goons on the side. Underneath says, "Well, I want your opinion. I'll give it to you." Sorry.
Yeah. Right. That's good. That's good. So I'm picturing the Vatican then as the guardians of the structure. Okay, and I'm picturing the nuns, and these are the progressive nuns that are out in the trenches, as following the intuition of their belief of helping the poor and the marginalized and so forth. But what I'm not seeing is the harmony between the two, where there's a big enough circle that allows for two circles within the circle. And could you comment on that and tell me what that might have to do with?
Right. I'm only 86, and I'm still struggling with that. You can be, You're struggling with yourself or your small community all the time, but that doesn't mean you are connecting with the self of the larger world, which is always at least 300 years behind you in regard. And it's tough, and they are carrying the structure and the tradition, and all those are very important values. And to throw them over is to help to produce chaos. But it's tough, and I think like the Immaculate Heart, they're carrying the intuition of the future, or what could be, and for many people we ought to be. I think to really to save the church itself, to have married clergy and women as clergy, that's the obvious next step. But this is a shaking, it's shaking. And those guys, if I've spent my entire, if you suddenly tell me Jungian psychology is absolutely shown to be totally false, and I'm 86, you think I'm going to buy that? Come on, If you spend a lifetime doing what you do, and this is your deal, you're not going to give it up that easily. And even if I'm okay with Jung because he lets me be me. That's the difference. But I think it's admirable what the sisters are trying to do and are doing, and they're carrying that struggle. But I wish I understood the underneath forces. Like you, I see in the world it's going that way. I see it on all the religions. There is much more the conservatism, and at the same time, the deepening, and as a Jungian too, the terrible value of the individual is above all, and yet that's not enough. Without that collective, it's you can be up on the mountain being a hermit and stuff, but and that's true. The hermit, these guys are valuable because they're doing the work that a lot of us don't do. They're totally alone with God, and they're carrying that we're not. So we're all part of that totality. We're all part of the mind of God, and as she told me. But it's all in crisis and chaos, and I think it's a tribute to you guys to being willing to continue the struggle, because where you started in a sense was with what was his name when you guys separated, when the order separated.
Talking about the Cardinal McIntyre.
McIntyre, yeah, that delightful man. And that's what, back in my early day, you separated on those grounds then. You just want to change clothes. It's something as simple as that. And now it's happening again. And so you're always carrying, you're right, you're carrying the intuition and the future and the necessity.
I see them as they're the visionaries, really.
Right.
And therefore under attack.
Right.
But
the other half is you're carrying something terribly important that those guys can't gainsay. You're trying to help the poor. Okay, and I'm working with this atheist guy who teaches in a Catholic school, and he's always for that. Jesus the socialist. And that's not too popular. Because, we're not into healthcare. So, but those opposite, no question, you're absolutely right. And I congratulate you for carrying, yourself internally between the intuition and the structure, tradition and now. And see, if you carry that, then it doesn't have to be outside where it becomes rebellion and revolution and all that. And from the deeply introvert point of view, if you continue that internally, it will have an effect. Do you believe it?
Yes, I do.
You're an introvert. Okay.
When you asked a moment ago about the commentary on Western thought and what have you on the religions having a masculine host, I've read somewhere over the last 40 years that the emphasis in the creation of religions focusing on men and men's power is because it's the male energy that needs to be controlled and contained. That's where the danger is to societies. The expansion. Well, that's been true that's been going on for well over 2,000 years. That even Christianity was a response to the Roman brutality, and that was masculine in nature ad infinitum. I mean, and that we've been seeing that conflict for 10,000 years.
I don't know if it goes back that far, surely, but I think, actually at the beginning of Christianity, the rival religion was Mithraism. And the central figure is Mithras, who, interestingly, carries a bull, has killed a bull, and carries it on his shoulder as a source of infinite wealth. Okay? And Mithraism was the favorite religion of the Roman warriors. Interesting, huh? And they definitely needed that transformation of that aggression. And Jesus, of course, I mean, as it developed, was much more the religion of love and was moving away from all that. So there was a need. But the initial condition of the masculine principle was saying, you know, if it had been left to the matriarchy, it would be nothing, we wouldn't have any spoons. Because that's acceptance of totality and being with the flow of nature and giving birth. Do you know, it doesn't have that thrust. It doesn't have, I mean, of course, it's not men and women are like that. Men and women are themselves combined of, you know, male and female, and that's the whole point, ultimately to become one. The male and female inside yourself, otherwise you're too one-sided. But in terms of the matriarchy, they weren't going anywhere. Very slow. And that energy of the masculine came through men with their hunting and all, you know, all that, and started all this stuff. And it becomes, after a while, I don't know, 2,000 years ago, it's a little early, but the ultimate of that is the Enlightenment in the West, and now it's reached its ultimate, and we see all along everywhere. But the amazing thing, it's uncertain. But I'm told, like, you read stuff like there are certain psychologists and others who say that actually violence is declining. Have you ever read about that? There's less aggression now. There's a psychologist, what's his name? Pinsker. And I don't trust other things he's right, so I don't know if he's right about that. Psychologists are not to be trusted. I'm sorry, I have to do this aside, because I didn't do this Friday night. One of the early analysts here was a woman who was doing chirology, you know, palmistry, and back in 1950, when I was in analysis, being in band analysis, she did a case study and showed a before and after. You know, here was the palm before the analysis, and here was the palm after, and it was very changed. And I thought, oh, I didn't say that Friday night, but this is evidence-based therapy. You think the APA would go for that? No. Anyhow, yes.
This is not a question, it's more of a comment. You know, one of the central images in these series is the ox, of course. And if we go back, you know, just to the previous picture, I mean, I can just see it in my mind. Krishna sitting atop the bull playing his flute. And when I started thinking that, then you mentioned Mithras, and then I started thinking back to ancient Egypt, and of course there was the Apis bull. So this image of, you know, the ox bull is just...
Oh, it's yeah.
It's archetypal.
Well, I think that's true. Speaking of the bull of his nature, or the bull of his in Egypt, the bull of his mother. The bull carries, and it's especially in its non-gendered form, it carries that image. These, you know, like the ox in the East it carries the libido, like the horse has done in the West, or
carries the soul. The Apis bull carries the soul.
The soul, and in India, it's the elephant. You see, it's the elephant or the ox or of our own nature, which is the self appearing in our animal nature. That's why in all the religions you have the animal plays such an important part. You're not going to just kill it; it has to play, you know, Jesus with the lamb, and so on. This is very clear, particularly in Hinduism, which we'll do next. The various animals representing different levels of the instinctual level of aggression, for example. In Hinduism, it's the ram carries that aggressive character, and in that series is followed by the gazelle. When you move up from that chakra to the heart chakra, the gazelle, which is not a violent animal, it changes. So it's, from what you said back there, it's clearly our aggressive nature has to be transformed. It's been known a long time. What did William James say? We needed to find an ethical equivalent for that in some way. And I think things like the Olympics are things, you know, one tries to do, and so on. But that's certainly the issue of the time. But with that becomes that women get more aggressive.
Snugglovers.
Well, in every way. They're in sports and politics, all those things. And that's the question of working with, do you work with the animus or does the animus have you? Or for a man, are you with the anima or does the anima have you? And that's what where the Jung's genius was, is that you need to relate to the contrasexual side, leading to a union. Otherwise, you're possessed by one side or the other.
Just as a footnote, we have the eagle, of course, symbolizing this country, which seems very appropriate, but it was Ben Franklin who was really pushing for the turkey, the symbol of industriousness.
Gobble, gobble. Well, that's true. You see, we think of ourselves as very peaceful, but our animal is the eagle, who is a plunderer. Right. Yes?
I just wanted to add to something you were saying, tracing the bull through sort of religious history. I thought about the irony of the bull in the financial district in Manhattan. That's all I wanted to add.
You prefer the bear?
Just we should probably get rid of that bull. Is all I'm saying.
That's bull. Well, if you're feeling bearish. Well, that's the question. I think you can't. It's so troublesome. You want to get rid of it, but it's like, are you trying to get rid of fanaticism? I don't think you can. Well, you want to help transform it if one can. But I keep looking to see what does the underneath self trying to say. That's why we're all waiting for the Redeemer, for the Messiah to come, and all of them. In Judaism and Christianity, Judaism is the first coming, in Christianity the second coming. In Buddhism, it's coming. It's all that idea of the Redeemer. Now, whether that Redeemer is somebody or something, or it's in ourselves, that's uncertain. And at the end, though, we have the rapture in which 70,000 Jungians will go to heaven. You thought it was Christians, didn't you? Okay, shall we continue?
Will Jung be there?
Yes, he'll be there, because he and I are both stand-up Jungians. He can be very funny, by the way. He would laugh. His laughter was compared to the Africans. I think I forgot the particular tribe. They said that he was an African because his laugh was like that. This full-bodied, wholehearted laugh.
This image, it seems to bring us, full circle to enlightenment, etc. But as I mentioned earlier, he reminds me of the Bodhisattva, which to me is a kind of a complex figure, because if I understand the meaning of the Bodhisattva is that whereas he can leave this world, quote unquote, out of his compassion, mercy, desire, refuses that and takes up the path of bringing others to enlightenment.
That's right. The central tenet in Buddhism is compassion. And the central figure would be the Bodhisattva who has had enlightenment and chooses to stay in the world.
But isn't that an attachment?
It can be, no question. You see, if you're doing anything with attachment, you're already out of it. But see, these religions are essentially leaving the world. And if you're dealing with the Western monotheisms, Judaism and Christianity, you're back into the world. Tikkun olam, repairing the world, or saving, and so on. It's the opposite. And that need, of course, is to leave the world and be in the world is in us all to varying degrees. And this is the one which goes beyond really what the East is in general, because he's not attached even to being back in the world. But you see, you got the right intuition, because who's he there with? Look at the guy. Looks just like he did at the beginning, right? So he's meeting his own beginning self or some parallel person. It was just like that.
So he's in this world but not of it.
And you'll see when we talk about Hinduism, When Jung wrote the thing of his about Kundalini Yoga 32, he didn't get or couldn't imagine a process without the ego. Like you get to, we're talking about the Sahasrara, the top chakra where everything's going on. He said this doesn't make any sense. It's no importance. But we'll talk about that. That's the Jung of 32. I think the Jung of in the late 50s was a different guy, and I'll give you evidence of that from the dreams. Yes, please.
There's the idea of the Hindu ascetic who leaves the family to find enlightenment, and once he finds it, he re-enters the world.
Yes.
And it's the same idea.
Same idea.
Yeah. It also reminds me of Jung talking about entering the underworld and then coming back and returning with the riches or the treasure
With
to
the
be
jewel.
shared.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Right, exactly right. That's, as I was saying to some earlier, that it's unnatural to leave the tribe. See what they're saying? Why are you doing this at all? Stay home and do all this. We're herd animals. And our natural condition is to be with the family, with the tribe. There are people, primitive cultures, they never leave anything. It's right there. The village brings you up, as Mrs. Clinton says. And she's right. And that's the natural condition, to be part of the community and enjoy that. I've had people come from other, from the children don't leave home until they marry. Here is, what's the matter with you? You're dependent, or you should be out. And there is no, you leave home only when you go to another home. So it's the institution is central. So if you're on this path of individuation, you're going against the natural instinct. I had a dream, when was it, some time ago, where I was back in my youth. I went to this wonderful summer camp from the age of 10 until 16. I was a camper and then a counselor, and it was great. I learned everything there. In winters, I was smart and neurotic in school. In summers, I was, full of vim and vigor and dancing and all that stuff. Swimming. And it really saved me. So I had a dream I was back at that place, but it was now built up. It was, all built up in one place. The other place was all jungle, opposite. And then there were these two animals. One was an African Cape buffalo, and the other was a snake. And they were looking at each other. And the issue is, could they live together? I'm a bunch of intuitives, you understand it. Okay. Which in a sense is back to my own paradise, and where these two instincts of the soul, one is the group instinct of the buffalo, it's a herd animal, and the snake, it's always alone. Could they coexist? I'll let you know when I've solved it. That's the deal. So you're quite right. So if you do that, if you make this trip, then you need to bring back something. Jewelry that you've made, or a dance, or an idea, or, and those or the shaman doing something of that sort. In every culture, there is this carrier of that, who does that, who helps advance the consciousness of the culture. And we're in that now. I think Jung's great contribution was of course, the idea of individuation. Because for so many people, the religions into which they were born had essentially died. Nietzsche announced that in the late 19th century, God was dead. Well, what does that mean? I mean, if we are naturally religious people, it means that the image of God just went back into the unconscious. And it's coming in another way. And Jung's saying, well, then you go to where it is. You go into your own soul. And you find it that way. And for some people, it means going back, ultimately through that work. They return to their religion of origin or to a new religion or something. And for some, that path of individuation is the whole thing. And then what's your relationship to the collective? And for me, my own path, the ecumenical myth, was to connect with many religions, but also deepen my connection with my religion of origin. And that was the thing I was trying to explain to people. Apparently this is not very common. Either I'm universal and ecumenical, or I'm particularistic. But what if you're both? Kill them. But that dream was, now it is, after Jung, and Jung's dead now, 60 years, there is a need for some kind of a some community rebirth, community reorganization. Hence all these revolutions are somewhere finding something where there is a collective joining, a meaningful collective. It also explains why there's so much regression to conservatism, or memory of past values, where it really worked, or where it's still alive in various places. And so it's of huge importance and value, and yet to be worked out. Please.
Could you comment, at the same time as you work on your individuation and on your depth, you also arouse hostility from people who are not there? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, no. It's always been just delightful for me. Nobody is envious of me. Nobody attacks me. I have no idea what you're talking about. Yeah, that's... it's a secret, because if you're on your path and you're connected with the self, it's both a value and a threat. And the value is, sure, why did I follow these people, Jung and my analysts and all that? Sure, it's a projection of the self on to them, and until you get your own back. And then for somebody but also a threat that you're not with your own self. And something in you is saying rightly, don't go to that son of a gun. You're better than he is, or you have it all inside yourself. The answer is you do. But you're stuck in that place as you don't know it inside yourself. And, so it's also part of the human condition. Melanie Klein taught us about envy and greed, and, it was known before, I think. They're called the deadly sins. So, yeah. It's also, if you're attacked, then, too, it's to somewhere you're not at that last picture. Not earthed, not grounded enough, not with the wine bibbers and butchers. The wine bibbers and butchers didn't attack this guy. Did they? He's just like they are. So it's also a challenge. I like to think of the Dalai Lama as an example of that. A very ordinary, earthy guy with a sense of humor and all that. But he's done the work, you can tell.
Well, he's a bodhisattva.
I think so. It's interesting because, well, never mind, it's another story. Yes.
The other thought I had, which is unrelated, the Meister Eckhart said, "Rid me of God."
What's that?
Meister Eckhart
said what?
Say, "Rid me of God."
With me or God?
Rid me.
Rid me of God. Oh, that's ultimate stuff. That's deep Christianity stuff. Yeah. That's. Well, here too, even the idea of holiness does not obtain.
This is it, yeah.
Do you see? As long as you're attached to a divinity out there somewhere,
the duality.
You're into the duality. Yes.
So that's why he said, "Rid me of God."
Yes. Rid me of God.
Or any idea of God.
Yes.
Any idea of God that's not God.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Did she tell you that too? Yes, please, in the back.
Well, no, I was just struck with the last sentence of how very Christian the last sentence is, with the common people, and the admonition that post-enlightenment, your job is to be with the people, to be among the people, to be no more than the people, no less than the people, to be a person.
That's right.
And that process is how we are all then converted. That we're all liberated that way, he says, and they are all converted into Buddhists.
Say again, that process is how we are converted.
That your work is how others are converted. That his work is how you're converted, whoever he or she is.
Yeah, that's a deeper perception. That's very good. Thank you.
Two things. The first, this picture reminded me of something I heard that Jung said. I don't think I ever read it, but I heard he said that when we do these kinds of talks and lectures, if the person who's coming in to clean up afterward doesn't understand what you're talking about, then you don't understand what you're talking about. That was one. The other thing, and as you went through these pictures, I was thinking about, in psychological work, particularly in the transference, we really recognize that it's not linear, and that any aspect can appear, the end can come before the beginning. Do you think that is also true when you're on a spiritual path, that it's not linear as these pictures would demonstrate, but actually in some other shape?
Yeah, I agree. It's also my experience that it's that way. Also, Jung, he tried, writing a book about his theory, and he wrote, the book, 2 Essays on Analytical Psychology? It's well worth reading. It was very popular, particularly for graduate students and people like me who have a sort of a theoretical bent and need. And he talks about the stages. You confront the shadow, and then you confront your contrasexual element, the anima and the animus, and the old wise man and woman, and then the self. And it's a very, very nice book. And it is sort of true. In any little small process, it'll happen. But in the long term, it's not. You do the same thing over again, and the path is serpentine. So you're doing this, and you're back to the beginning. A little more consciousness, but you're back to the beginning. So I think all of these methods are ways of trying to formulate it, either theory as Jung did, or this, as to what this process is like. And I think you're absolutely right. It describes all these processes, and to a certain degree, their sequence. But you can begin at the all that, then you're achieved, and you're back at the beginning. I think often, not often, but sometimes, the experience, there have been many of these, especially from India, who have come to this country, the gurus, who have established a following. You're familiar with all those guys, you know about them. And so many of them fell into wine, women, and song, not so much song. And it's somehow that casts aspersion on their religion or what they came from. I don't think so. They were contained in their religion. It worked. They're thrust into a whole new environment, and they no longer have the kinds of protections that they had. So they fall victim all over again to a whole new kind of lusts, the things that they didn't have in India and so on. And yeah, I think you're thrown into a whole new situation. I mean, suppose this guy is thrown into war. God help him if he's in the Merchant Marine like I was. How would he do? I don't know. Like if I were thrown into a monastery. I think I like that. But, the circumstances change. And I think even also you all know from analytical work that you talk about your first analysis and your second analysis. Why wasn't it all solved in the first? When I started graduate school, there was 4 years and you're finished. You get to the Oedipus complex and boom, it's over. Isn't that the way for all of you? What's the matter with you? And it's a belief in process, which is so, but the idea that it's only that is mistaken. Thank you. I think that's right. Okay. Any further comment about this before we leave this?
It seems to me in some stuff that I've read, Jung seemed to be of two minds.
At least.
Well, at least on this subject. There's a quote somewhere where he said he basically instructs Westerners not to practice yoga. And yet I've also read that he did.
Right.
Would you square that away for me?
Oh, I'd be happy to. When he was in the middle of struggling with his passions, he could find no peace, but he did do yoga to calm himself. Hatha yoga, not Kundalini, Hatha yoga. So he knew the value of it, and he used it for himself. But his point about not so much practicing yoga, but it's about Westerners fleeing their own souls to buy, to put on a fake hat. Look, Ma, now I'm an Indian. And that's what he decried. No, you must, but you go to your own origins, where you come from. And you get to, the West has done it differently. That was his point. I think that the yoga is very useful. I can see no reason now why people can't do yoga and doing it, because it's a method like any other. I mean, you can do this without losing your soul, but this is why he did it. that you don't falsely put on false feathers.
Here's a very subjective, personal question. Maybe impossible to answer, but in your knowledge of him, was there a time, a period, when he did take mastery over his passions? And I'm talking about the Sabrina episode and Tony Wolfe, etc. But and that's just one.
That's the beginning. He was 25 years old.
Right, but at what point is there any time when you would say, he's
totally mastered his passions?
Well, I don't know that anybody totally.
That's right. I don't think anybody. No, he did. I mean, if you've read the Red Book, he went through that whole struggle. And read the last part in the Scrutinies, how he really beat the hell out of himself to get to this place. He went through a lot of hell, and through alchemy as well. So but he had a temper. And I remember talking with Anieli, or heard her, his last secretary, who also was his amanuensis for Memories, Dreams, and Reflections. And she was saying she had, was having an analysis with him, and sometimes he would blow up. Just blow up. And I said, did you? She said, oh yeah, we knew, we took it, because he had to do that. He had too much. When I went to his office, he had a statue carved on the way up of Voltaire. As a rationalist, who was his shadow, the rationalist Voltaire. But he did carvings of the devil a lot. So he had, it's not easy to deal with those energies. And at these various levels, I think it depends what you have to cope with. If you have a lot to cope with, it's harder than if you have less to cope with. In some ways, you're better off its level, little. But I don't know that anybody, as long as you're in a mortal frame, whether you're totally, it's like saying, and you do, then you leave. Yes.
I don't think that Tony Wolfe needed for Jung to get rid of his passion. I think we would not have had Jung if we didn't have Tony Wolfe.
Well, I think he wouldn't have the mature Jung if he didn't have. There were a lot of people. You see, Tony Wolfe was very important, and actually, his main attraction to her actually was she knew philosophy. She was not a sort of a Betty Grable anima. I mean, she was a highly educated, highly intelligent, and spiritual woman, and he learned from her. She was a teacher for him. She was his analysan first, but their relationship after the analysis was over was one of mutual learning. She was highly trained in philosophy. He was not trained in philosophy, and he learned from her. And she did creative work. It's unfortunate because I think she took the tack. She went. Jung did the types in the early 20s, and then she developed her, her feminine types, which was very useful. He was trying to get Jung back, I think, from von Franz, because Jung was onto alchemy, and she couldn't go there. That's tragic, really. And oh, right. And he needed companions on as he had, but she couldn't go there. So that's why that really. And she died very unhappy. But I talked to the grandson, who was a psychiatrist and a Jungian analyst. Nice guy. He walked like Jung. And he said when he was a kid, they would, on Sundays, she would be there. She'd be there for dinner. The middle of the day is the main meal, and he thought she was like an auntie or something, part of the family. Tony Wolfe was very important, but she was not everything.
But then in this lovely book, Two Friendships, Hesse, and,
oh yeah, I know it.
He refers there to nobody can understand me except a poet.
That's
and
right.
Who was he? And he said, well, she died. And he didn't say Tony Wolfe, but it was exactly Tony Wolfe.
No, he later said, nobody gets all of me. Nobody ever did. That's part of his sadness, is that And that's it. I think he constellated such a large portion of the self that nobody got it all. I understand that. No, she didn't get alchemy. And probably von Franz came the closest. And, he met, he had a...
But that was a different relationship.
Doria, okay, and he had a relationship with Pauli as well, as a physicist.
Oh.
And with, he was always looking for somebody who could meet him on an equal grounds, and except Pauli turns out at the end wanting to, colonize psychology. Everybody has a power trip going. And the great Nobel Prize winner was thinking, do you know the correspondence? It's wonderful correspondence.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, excellent. And he's Pauli, he's a Nobel Prize physicist. But he's thinking, psychology is really a branch of physics, because it serves Jung right, because he thought physics was a branch of psychology. See, every time, your religion is the right one, everybody else is, that you finally get the truth, then you'll be our acolyte.
But Pauli also said you need more than just psychology, you need something else, and that eros.
Yeah, well, at the end, you need love and work.
Yeah.
I agree.
But not the kind of love that Freud talks about.
I think he had love, don't you think? No, he didn't have that spiritual love so much, but in his way he did. I did, oh yeah. No, he was no slouch after all. Yes?
Listening to that comment about physics and psychology, have you seen Stephen Hawking's latest piece, or his series, where he talks about why, in essence, physics had to create or evolved consciousness?
No, I haven't seen that.
His argument is that it's the universe contemplating itself.
Oh yeah, well that I didn't know, but that he's come to something which is known for a long time.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah,
but I just thought his recent work is really remarkable.
Yeah. Well, he finally got to be Jewish, because that's the truth. And he got there without a circumcision, because that's it. The reason for creation was God needed to gaze upon face. And Jung, he got there separately. He didn't know all that stuff. Except at the end, he saw his connection, his psychology with Chan Buddhism and Kabbalah. And he didn't know that stuff. But that's it. Face needed to gaze upon face. God had everything except a partner to talk to. Yeah. So Hawking is there. Well.
Hawking actually argues that before the bang, there is no God. Because before the bang, there's nothing, not even time. And that without time, there's no place for God to exist. It's a real interesting argument. But it's
nice to read.
But it's fascinating stuff.
I'll bet. Have you read it, Christoph? No, Christoph. We have our own house physicist, so who solves all these questions for us.
I've not really read that book. I just heard that he wrote that with a journalist, and he was against the existence of God. So I don't know exactly what he says in that book. But you have many things in physics now which say that there was some kind of existence before the Big Bang. Mm-hmm. So some people are beginning to talk about pre-Big Bang. And so there's also what you were saying about the fact that there is a kind of consciousness was created because the universe had to contemplate itself in a way. Mm-hmm. This kind of thing, exists in physics now, and it's beginning to be. There is someone called Wheeler, who is one of the founders of quantum gravity, who is working. Well, he died 10 years ago. And so you worked a lot on that kind of thing, and so it's beginning to be seriously investigated. Yeah, physically, from the physical point of view.
Well, we need your writings to come out at a popular level. Yeah, that's great. Okay, we still have 2 minutes. Any final questions about the meaning of life?
I just wanted to comment about when you said that you had to stay away from active imagination until you were 40.
Oh, no, not active imagination.
But,
I did that all. I stayed away from Kabbalah.
From Kabbalah.
Not from active
And that
imagination.
reminded me of Jung, who had to stay away from Nietzsche and went to Goethe's Faust because he couldn't handle Nietzsche yet. It frightened him. And so he said that's why he stayed away from it until later, because of what he was reading, really frightened him.
Right.
And
I suppose it's similar, but Nietzsche is not Kabbalah.
No, no, no. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is about needing to be a certain age
That's
in
right.
order to handle
Exactly. That's
certain
correct.
ideas.
Yeah, and it's understood
Yeah.
historically that you have to take up certain things until you leave the role of householder. You know, in India you go into the woods or, you know, something. I mean, in our culture you stay as householder, but a certain level of experience and maturity.
I have one other comment to make. Many years ago, I had a dream, and it was a dream image, and the only thing it was writing, and it said, at the time I didn't know what it was, but it was Kabbalistic underpinnings, spelled with a C. And
With a C, that means that you come from Christian Kabbalah. No, I'm serious.
Yeah, I know and I had no idea what it was, but then I looked up Kabbalistic,
Oh, yes,
and
right.
that got me started. But,
Oh yeah, it's very valuable.
Yeah.
And it's very likely, actually, that one of the branches of Kabbalah which is so valuable is the use of the tarot cards. The major trumps, you all know that from the tarot cards, and the story is that they originated for the purpose of passing on the Kabbalah in this way. And it probably came from the Christian Kabbalists who took this on in the Middle Ages. Very popular.